Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
I'm a fan of classic movies.
Hello and welcome to Overlapping Dialogue, a podcast of audio commentaries dedicated to discuss cinema that fascinates us in a way we hope fascinates you. We're your co-hosts, Kyle and Levi Huffman. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Levi.
And here we are, episode 8.
Yep.
This again, I keep saying this over and over at the beginning, but this podcast is already flying by fairly quickly. Yeah. So we're going very much a different route
than 16 candles.
Than what we took with 16 Candles last week. And while I think that movie stirs a lot of feelings and opinions on our part and certain passions of sorts, this movie is going to be more immediate, I think, to our wheelhouse and our interests. From 1966, Seconds, directed by John Frankenheimer, who, as we'll talk about here in a moment, I think Frankenheimer is one of the most interesting, idiosyncratic, popular directors of American cinema in the 60s, and really, through his career, represents a little bit of a way station between the way things were and where the direction of cinema is going to be going in the next so many years. So, real quickly, if you'll just run through some of the details.
Yes. So
movie.
Seconds was released in 1966, and it is an American science fiction drama film. I think it's safe to say we could kind of add horror on that too, although it's not a traditional horror film.
Yeah.
But as I said last week, when we were kind of prefacing it, that we did that kind of write-up about 5 years ago about for Halloween for different blogs that we had, along with Philip Bryant, if you're listening, who did that as well. And we kind of picked movies we thought were the scariest non-horror movie ever made, and this was my pick for that.
Do you remember offhand what mine was? I don't even know if I remember.
I can look this up.
I'll do it while you're
go ahead. Yeah, but
it
kind of is a horror film. I'd also be interested to see what Philip said for that too, because I don't recall. But it is kind of a horror film in a way too. But like like Kyle says, directed by John Frankenheimer, and we'll be talking about him a lot later. But it stars a couple different people that are very memorable in a lot of ways, especially in 60s cinema. Rock Hudson. What's there to say about Rock Hudson? Of course, I mean,
he was one of the prototypical stars of the 50s and 60s, and I think years after the fact, especially after his unfortunate AIDS diagnosis in the early 80s, mid 80s, and he eventually died from that. And that was a shock for a lot of Americans. Didn't know that he was gay for one thing, closeted for so much of his life. But, him in Giant and him in some of those Doris Day movies he did, he really represented kind of just classic, traditional American man in movies.
In a way that Lancaster and even Kirk Douglas would have at the time.
And so, kind of casting him at the forefront of this movie is very very great casting and a great performance by Hudson.
I'll admit, I haven't seen a lot of Rock Hudson films, but this always has stuck with me as a really impressive performance. And I don't want to read too much into this kind of idea of this being, almost a kind of written between the lines about him being gay. I don't think that is really in the movie at all. But it is an interesting thought, I think, to kind of look at this movie in that way. about a man who isn't comfortable in his own skin and trying to change himself.
I know
there's a lot.
There's some literature out there that reinterprets a lot of Hudson's filmography through the lens of queerness. I'd actually be very interested in reading that.
I find it interesting.
I've not personally read it a lot. I'm sure this movie is going to be a huge artifact with regards to that. Real quickly, I'll interrupt. Mine was A Serious Man.
Okay, and Phillips was Zodiac.
Yeah.
No, those are all good.
Anyways,
those are all good
just
picks
to
for
interrupt that.
kind of scary stuff going on. But yeah, I mean, Rock Hudson. Normally, when I think about this movie, of course, he's the first thing I think of. And it's such a, like you said, it's such a shrewd casting, but it's also such a shrewd performance that he's kind of, and Alec Baldwin said this in his thing, but that we'll talk about in a little bit later, that he's playing an old man still, but he's a young man. And that's such a hard thing to do for anyone.
It should be said that by this point, Hudson was, about 40 years old, so he's not like super.
He's probably only
young,
about 20 or so years younger.
But to the point that this holds on, I was actually looking about this earlier, the way that his overall Wikipedia page, which is filled with all kinds of stuff, even characterized this movie. It's only 2 sentences that this movie gets on there, but I think it's very interesting what it says. It's talking about his overall decline in the stars as he was starting to fade a little bit by the time of the mid-'60s. Hudson next appeared in Blindfold, 1966, talking about he followed a very special favor from 65 after that. Then, working outside his usual range, he starred in the science fiction thriller Seconds, 1966, directed by John Frankenheimer. The film may contain Hudson's best performance, and then it just totally moves on and talks about other things, but I just find that very... Even the Wikipedia page is like, oh, maybe his best performance, and then moves on. I need to watch more of his movies. I've seen Pillow Talk, and I thought he was really good in that.
Yeah.
Really love Giant, and especially
that's a
Giant.
film I really want to see that I haven't.
And I think that's kind of the kind of performance on the pedestals for his career. Is like, he was in this big, grand kind of drama of that regard, and it is a pretty great movie. I think features one of the several James Dean performances really good in. So again, I think it's very shrewd to cast him in this movie, and again, he does such a great job of like playing a quote younger man who. Well, he's older man in a younger man's body. He does a great job with that.
Salome Jens as Nora Marcus. Also, by the way, Rock Hudson is known as Anticius Tony Wilson, who, as we'll talk... Well, I guess I should explain what the movie's about, because I kind of forgot. So, it's essentially about an older, about middle-age, getting towards just being kind of over-the-hill banker who lives in New York City.
Lives just a very boring life.
Suburban life. His kid, I think he has a daughter who's grown up and moved away, and he's living with his wife. The first version of him is played by John Randolph, who I'll talk about here in a moment. But he's this, old enough looking guy, just kind of unassuming, kind of bland existence. And he's contacted by an old friend of his who's been dead for some years. And he has a different voice, and he's talking to him over the phone, but he has a different voice, and he's saying, come to this place where you can be recommended for a project or something. And he proves that it is him, and that it is actually him, basically because of some information he gives him. And he goes there and he finds out that there's this secret company that will allow you for a big sum of money that I don't think it's ever said how much, but he's pretty rich, to get a new identity, have all this plastic surgery done, and become a totally new person. And you essentially, that old version of you is dead. They kill you off in this kind of measure of that. So then he is turned into Rock Hudson, basically, this younger man who's a painter who lives in Malibu, California.
It should be said, too, that, we might talk about this in a little bit, that this movie was a huge influence on Mad Men.
Yeah.
And in a lot of, this has been true for years before. I mean, you can go back to 1849 for this. Yeah. But California has always, in media, been depicted as, this land of dreams, of you can start your life over there. And so does it even say really where he's from? I'm assuming he's just this kind of
New York,
Eastern existence who all of a sudden he's going, oh, you're going to the sunny California coast, and oh, your life's going to be great there because you're totally restarting.
Right. Yeah.
And again, this is a science fiction drama thriller, so we know that it's not going to be nearly as ideal as he had hoped.
And he gets there and meets Salome Jens, and kind of has a relationship with her. But very quickly, as we said, he's an old man in a young man's body, and he has these specific ideas about these kind of conservative values that sort of break down in some ways, but ultimately actually don't.
Yeah.
And it's not a spoiler to say that by the end, he changes his mind and kind of wants to go back and try something different. And that's where the movie becomes its most horror. By the end. If you haven't seen this movie, which I hope you would have by now, or if you're watching this for the first time, and we can talk about this, it's a very shocking ending to a very shocking film.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that's basically what the movie's about, and we can talk about kind of what all the themes and kind of double meanings of this is later. But I figured we'd talk about that really quickly. So, John Randolph,
he plays the
original
Hamilton
version, and he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, but actually was beaten by Jack Lemmon, or by Walter Matthau, rather, in The Fortune Cookie, which we recently watched. Now, when I wrote a review of this movie back years ago, I watched this. I kind of compared this and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and how they were earlier versions of New Hollywood. Although that Butch Cassidy kind of was when New Hollywood was going on, but that in that review I said, I don't know how that could be possible that Walter Matthau and The Fortune Cookie, who cares? And then we recently saw that, and it's not as good as Seconds, but it's still quite good. But I just think that's funny that I was like, I can't believe that.
And Matthau was great in that.
Yeah, and I mean, Matthau's great in anything. Yeah. But I haven't really seen John Randolph in, I don't think, anything else, but he's very memorable here. He has a kind of thankless role in the movie to kind of establish that. And Rock Hudson's more of the draw because he's essentially playing a version of John Randolph while being Rock Hudson. Right. But John Randolph is really great, and we'll probably talk about him a little bit later. Will Geer as Old Man. I feel like I've seen him in some other things, but I don't really remember what they are. But he's that all shucks, everything's gonna be all right, sonny. He's basically the guy who runs the company. He, as you would probably realize, even in the first scene he's in, that the kind of old man facade, it's all a facade for these other evil things that are going on. Also, Richard Anderson as Dr. Ennis. He's kind of the guy that actually does the surgeries and everything. He's in a lot of different things. I've seen him in mostly some of these Frankenheimer movies as well. I think 7 Days in May. In a lot of he's one of those faces that pops up in a lot of 60s movies that I can't really remember what all he's in. But Murray Hamilton, who of course that picture on Wikipedia. Go look
most
up.
Most famous, of course, is the mayor in Jaws.
And in The Graduate. He's literally great in anything.
And he also in the Paul Newman Pool movie.
The Hustler?
The Hustler,
which I'd hope you know what movie that is. You'll find out about that later.
I'm sorry.
Murray Hamilton, he's like in one scene of The Hustler. But he's great in anything. Really great in The Graduate.
Yeah.
And he's really great here. He's the old friend, the new version of the old friend of Arthur Hamilton, who's the John Randolph character. He's only in like a couple scenes. Carl Swenson is Dr. Morse. I can't even see what his picture is here. I don't think I remember him in the movie. He's probably one of the other doctors.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is what's kind of great about this movie in terms of all the company stuff is just it's like all these, quote, anonymous older white men that you've seen in a lot of other things, and it kind of adds to this monochromatic idea of they're all the same, version of older white guy, basically, this time.
I'm going to try to say this name correctly. Keeg D, I guess. He was that guy that was like, he's only one scene of this. He was in The Manchurian Candidate in some of those scenes where they're brainwashing the people. So, he's in that too. Frances Reed, she's the wife in the movie of the original version of him. She's good in the few scenes she's in. Yeah. She kind of also has a thankless role as like because I think it's like said I don't remember how it was. He was supposed to have died. It was in like a hotel room fire or something. they'll talk about it in the movie. But that she kind of just has to live on, not knowing really what happened. And of course, there's a scene where Rock Hudson goes back to the house.
Yeah, it's one of the most memorable scenes I think in the movie.
Where it's him in the room with her, but she doesn't know that.
Yeah.
But then she's telling him things about him.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, but you're telling this to a stranger, but it is him." It's very weird. It's a very interesting scene. And very good. Yeah, but Wesley Addy as John, who he's been in so many
Network,
things.
I always remember him
he's in some Lumet films. We'll probably talk about Lumet a little bit in this podcast too. But yeah, he's in a lot of stuff. And he's the guy that's kind of his like handler, butler in Malibu. I think that's about it mostly.
Yeah. Most of the biggest.
For most of the big people. It was made for about before we get to how much money, because who cares?
This was made by Paramount. It should be said a studio movie, which makes it even more kind of shocking for this moment.
Right. And Jerry Goldsmith did the score.
Yeah.
Very weird. It kind of reminds me of Beetlejuice, some of the... specifically some of the violins and string instruments in it. Very scary score. James Wong Howe, I mean...
He was considered by many to be one of the great cinematographers of the classic Hollywood era. And I specifically also think I'm a lot... We'll go ahead and spoil this for you. 2 episodes from now, we're going to be doing Inherent Vice.
Yeah.
And in the movie, they drop his name once or twice, but I know in the book especially, his name is brought up all the time.
Yeah. Because there's especially... that. I love it in the book, but in the movie I actually like it better because you can see it. There's that moment where Mickey Wolfman's wife walks up and meets Joaquin Phoenix for the first time, and they're like the way the light is on her face, and she's like, "Do you like the lighting? James Wong Howe did it for us." And it's like, why would he do that for you? That's the joke. But no, I mean, he's done so many movies. I looked; he has 130 credits.
Yeah.
And
it should be said by this point, he was an older cinematographer.
Well, I think he was born in 1899, 2 days after my birthday, I think. So I just missed. We just missed it, James. But no, I mean,
other than like by 99 years.
Right. But anyway, I mean, he's done so many movies. He worked with all kinds of people. Samuel Fuller, I think he worked with here and there. Obviously, we're big fans of. And I should say, as many movies as he's made, and I've seen some here or there, this is the one I always think of.
Well,
because it's so striking.
Also that this movie in particular came at a moment where the classic Hollywood style is starting to go through a lot of radical changes. So the fact that he participated in that makes it all the more interesting.
And also that we read a long article that's very good from American Cinematographer. It was actually published in the 90s, I think, but we read it on the internet that talked about this movie very in depth about its cinematography, which I mean, like I said, I mean,
it's one of the most. And it should be said, Howe also got a Oscar nomination for this, and he had many, and I think he had some wins even before this. So he, and I also it said that this was the very last year. I read this somewhere. This very last year that they gave out the cinematography award in color and in black and white separately before they combined them, and that this lost to Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, which is very good. It's a pretty great movie. Yeah. I would say this, both the cinematography and the movie itself, is a little better, but that is a great movie in and of itself. And should be said, the debut of a very important filmmaker of this era as well, Mike Nichols. So the one thing I want to say about that, as far as that article, was that they talked about how there's actually some debate about who made the choices of whether it was Frankenheimer or Howe. I think it is somewhere if I don't know the specifics, but I would assume it's somewhere in the middle, that both kind of contributed. Yeah, I mean, that's always the problem with film authorship is that, it's this person, it's that person. It's like, well, it ultimately comes out of conversations that not only these two men, but all their technicians are having about how do we accomplish this shot or that shot. So sometimes attributing pure film authorship is a farcical endeavor because, again, it's just all these people collaborating, and ultimately what we get is what feels so specific and so idiosyncratic when in reality is the result of a variety of collaborators, which I think is what makes films exciting overall as an art form. But
and I think, I mean, there's so many things about this movie as far as the cinematography, and we'll kind of talk about them throughout. Very early use of what would later be basically a version of Steadicam. It wasn't created as Steadicam.
Yeah, Steadicam would really kind of become a lot more prominent by the mid to late 70s.
Right.
Bound for Glory had one of the very first famous Steadicam shots, and then of course The Shining, which came along about 4 years after that.
Garrett Browning, of course, created that, who I've been in the same room with before, I should say.
You did see a screening of The Shining with him.
Yeah. I saw a screening of The Shining that he and Joe Dunton, who made a lot of various lenses and stuff, were at, and that was really cool. But anyway, I don't want to toot my word on that. But it's not like I met him or
Kubrick's
anything.
own daughter was there as well,
And
right?
Vivian Kubrick was there too, but that was late. That was actually a little later. They had a Q&A. And I left it early because I was like, it was in downtown Wilmington, and it was on a Friday night. It wasn't that late, but it was getting towards 10 o'clock, and I was like, I better get home. If you're probably screaming, like, why did you give up that opportunity? Which is a question I've continued to ask myself ever since. So, I mean, I was there for a little bit of it, but anyway, it's less a little bit of Steadicam, as it's like they attach the cameras to people and kind of did that sort of thing, and it's very strange, and just, there's a lot. We read in there's so many times where there's so many cameras running at different times, and it's a lot more handheld, and it's very strange. So we'll talk about that throughout the movie.
But I think this would be a great time. We've mentioned him already multiple times. We want to spend a good amount of time, I think, today talking about John Frankenheimer, who I kind of said off the cuff last week and didn't even realize what I was saying until after I said it, but I would stand by, is I know certainly one of your favorite filmmakers, and is one of mine as well, and his whole career in general, and certainly his endeavors in that career, come in a very interesting transitional moment for especially Hollywood cinema. And this is kind of the conclusion of the whole, quote, paranoia trilogy that he made, or trilogy of paranoia, whatever it is, of The Manchurian Candidate, which is probably the most, I would say, among his most well-known films.
I think that's probably his most well-known film, I would think.
Yeah, probably is. And then 7 Days in May, which is among my very favorite of his.
And that's, I think, one of his best films.
And it should be said that Frederick March, who plays the president in that movie, I think one of my all-time favorite presidential performances.
But if you're incorrect in that judgment, we're in for a week of unadulterated nightmare.
And there's everybody's in that movie too. It's like Burt Lancaster, who we also love, Kirk Douglas, Ava Gardner, was she in that as well?
She was in a couple scenes.
So there's just
Edmund O'Brien. But no, and then this is the kind of last of those movies, which is interesting because it's the least political.
I was going to say that
the three
out of these three movies, the first two are much more concerned with like institutions.
Yeah.
Whether it be, of course, the United States government, especially for those first two movies, but also the like possibility of foreign influence, or even our own generals turning against our president.
Right.
So it's like kind of dealing with this very big themes.
Yeah.
Which it should be said is like occurring in the early '60s, when like very famously John F. Kennedy had seemingly in the press and in private a lot of contempt for the kind of military-industrial complex, which Eisenhower had just warned about as he was leaving office in '61. And so they're very big movies, and the characters are very much standing in for ideas and giving a lot of speeches. And I love those movies in their own way, but they're very big, and they're very, as you said, political. Yeah. This movie, I think what makes it so fascinating and possibly the superior out of the three is that it's a subtle downshift. It's okay. This is kind of more concerned in some ways with corporatism, a little more than like these big federal government or United States in the same way. It's like much more concerned with corporatism as a big thing, but really the heart of the movie is we get the most personal character, and most specific character out of any of these movies. With this old man who wants to become young again.
And I'll talk about this later more in depth, but I think that in itself is very political and an expression of counterculturalism at this time, but I'll talk more in depth about that later.
In general, Frankenheimer is such a gifted director. I mean, I think what makes him interesting, he did a lot of TV work, I believe, in the 50s, I think, before he started really making feature films. He seems to me like one of the first generations of filmmakers who was really inspired by and studied the films of Alfred Hitchcock. I think like you look at like the trajectory of a lot of filmmakers of that time, He seems like he's one of the first directors to kind of say, okay, what Hitchcock did, I'm going to take that and I'm going to try to, not when I say take it to another level, not necessarily elevate it, but just say, okay, what are we going to do now? What's the new direction to go of what Hitchcock built with the thriller? It should be said the opening titles of this are done by Saul Bass, who we'll probably mention as the movie starts. And it is in some ways very reminiscent in that way of Vertigo in terms of just the very opening credits
with
of that.
eyes and
and the body and the face and all that. And so I just think Frankenheimer's a really special director. And what's great is that, I think he's most known for this 60s period in terms of his films, but he makes films into the 70s, into the 80s, into the 90s, and even in, I think, the early 2000s as well. So one of my personal favorite movies of his is Black Sunday
love that.
From the 70s. That just kind of, to me, represents one of the kind of just the peak of the B movie. Yeah. It's kind of got a goofy, silly premise, but it has some really big political ideas in it. It's talking about Israel-Palestinian conflict. It's talking about the Vietnam War. Like, it's this very big canvas and tableau it's working
about
with.
Terrorism at that
terrorism,
time. And,
while also being goofy and fun and silly. And that, to me, almost represents almost the perfect B movie. There are B movies that are, quote, better than that, but that's, like, to me, the prototypical B movie. And just for you, I know as a fan of Frankenheimer, what makes him special to you when you kind of think his name comes up?
Well, it's partially this movie, but I also think The Manchurian Candidate as well, which is actually one of my... I do like The Manchurian Candidate quite a bit. I think it's really good, but I don't love it as much as some other people do. But those movies are so... I don't even know what the word is, just radical.
They feel like, I know a lot of people really reject the phrase or the term the zeitgeist, and trying to place all this importance on people who are now or then, like trying to be on the pulse of the country. But I think that's frankly an undervalued thing at this point, and I mean in some cases overvalued. It depends. But he really had his pulse on this moment of the '60s in a way that a lot of people at the time didn't necessarily have. Just this political perceptiveness, and the fact that he could take kind of what was going on politically, socially in the nation and transform it into cinema that in his own way I feel like influences things to come, I think is what makes his career so special.
And specifically with The Manchurian Candidate, as everybody knows, came out in 1962, and the primary plot of that movie is all about a, wronged war veteran who has been brainwashed to assassinate American political leader. As Lee Harvey Oswald, of course, we know the more we find out about the JFK assassination, the less we know, but I'm pretty sure was not specifically brainwashed into doing anything he did. But it's very clearly and very eerily and horrifyingly perceptive. And everybody talks about that. But that and 7 Days in May I find to be just such a fascinating movie in so many ways about the nature of leadership.
Is that 64?
Yeah.
64, okay.
The nature of leadership and whether or not that can be taken away if people, dictate, well, you're not as good of a leader as you ought to be,
Right. And it should be said, was it General Walker? Who was that former general who was like making a lot of
and he had been
stuff against
almost
Kennedy
assassinated by Oswald before that, right?
And I feel like that's playing on that a little bit. And what I made a reference to this kind of at the end of the last episode. What is so fascinating to me about this movie in this particular moment, if you're just like, okay, what's going on in like 1966? That obviously this is in the midst of America has just now involved itself in the Vietnam War. President Johnson was reelected in a landslide in 64. And so when people now, years later, and the way the 60s have been mythologized, talk about, quote, the 60s, they think of like the whole era of the like, Brave, or not Brave New World, New, or maybe seven, New Frontier of like this Kennedy optimism and Camelot and all that stuff. And then, we have our crises. We have the Cuban Missile Crisis. Before that, we had the Bay of Pigs invasion and all that. And so, but Kenny, he stood strong. He prevented us to going to war with the Russians. And then a year later, his assassination, which shocked the nation and really put us in a tailspin for a great deal of years. In some ways, I wonder if we've ever totally came out of it. But we're still talking about it. We're still obsessed with it. So, and then I feel like our cultural memory, like a civil rights movement happened, and then we jumped to and
there was like a Great Society and poverty and that whole thing, and then
then we jumped to the late 60s, and we see like the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago, where the police are facing protesters, and then you have the country goes so cynical they go back to the Richard Nixon who's elected, but I feel like this whole middle period of the 60s is sometimes neglected in the cultural
basically
memory.
The Johnson period.
I think this movie really kind of captured it in a beautiful way of a guy trying to turn back the clock and trying to say, well, let's go back to let's try to get back to the way things were, even in a very short-term basis. And of course, that's impossible. We can't do that. And both literally for the United States at this time and for also this man. And you think, we're going to wash the sins away and we're going to be a new person. And in some ways he indulges, as you said, in some ways he indulges in that. In other ways he rejects it. But ultimately he knows it's not true and knows it can't be. And
someone referenced in one of the articles we read about this, they mentioned the moment in the Buckaroo Banzai, whatever that is all called, that Confucius in that movie said, wherever you go, there you are. Which is funny, but it makes you realize like he's the same man. It doesn't matter how much. And the same thing with Don Draper in Mad Men. It doesn't, or the Dick Whitman become Don Draper. No matter how much you try to change yourself, you're still going to be that same person. And that's obviously Don Draper gets a far happier ending than this person does in this movie.
Depending on your interpretation. But literally, it's a better place regardless. He's not,
it doesn't matter what happens to him after. Well, let's just say what happens to this man, nothing can happen after that. His life is over. So, but in that, so it's kind of the same thing of like, no matter what you do, you're going to be that same person. And there's no way you can change
to that point. I think I can speak for both of us. We're absolute 60s nerds.
Yeah.
Literally any time in the history of time. Yeah. Okay, if you said what is your most favorite time to study and look at and fascinated by, it would be the 1960s. I should be said, our mother was born the year this movie was released, 66. Our dad was born in 54, so he would have been like, you were just actually talking about him with this a little bit ago, 12 years old. He had no idea that this movie existed.
No,
and it kind of fell through the cracks, obviously, in the culture.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit.
But I just absolutely am fascinated with the 60s in general, just the history. But also, and this will go another direction, when you think of like 60s Hollywood or 60s cinema, what's your overall take or impression of that period?
The first thing I think of off the top of my head is stuff like The Great Escape. That came out in the 60s, didn't it?
It did,
I'm pretty sure. I don't think The Dirty Dozen came out in the 60s. I think that was it? Okay, I couldn't remember if that was early 70s.
I'm going to get the dates for these.
It's a lot of like World War II
63
movies. 63
was Great Escape.
It's a lot of these World War II movies, a lot of remakes of like musicals like Showboat.
Also, Sound of Music was like a huge 60s
all these
success.
big musicals.
Dirty Dozen was 67.
Okay, so a lot of these like
a Man on a Mission movies.
And or like It's a Mad World, which I'm still a big fan of, and we might be doing that movie eventually, if I'm sure, at some point. But movies like that are
just
obviously
jam-packed.
Part of the reason for that is because television, they were competing with television, ultimately, because they were like, we've got to make these big and biblical epics, which were mostly in the late 50s, but kind of went into the 60s. A lot of these really big, bloated movies, a lot of comedy movies like, what was the name of that movie? Not With My Wife You Don't.
Yeah.
And
what if they had a war and no one came?
And the Russians are coming, stuff like that. These very kind of big, ridiculous movies. So that's the first thing I think of. Now, that's mostly in the early 60s, but then they have stuff in the later 60s of this too. But it's a time of great, you said this, it's a time of great change in the culture where there's a lot of these Hollywood movies that are still trying to hold on to this type of thing and are still trying to be, and I guess a lot of those beach movies came out in the early 60s.
Yeah,
a lot of these movies that are trying to be kitschy and trying to appeal to youthfulness,
Yeah.
but are done in this way that is still very much like 50s Hollywood. But then you have a movie like this, which is even to this day one of the most shocking movies I've ever seen. I just can't.
Well, I think
get over it.
for me, what is, and you've seen this movie more than I have, but even in my memory of seeing this, to me, what's so shocking about this movie is that you literally see. I feel like I'm literally seeing the industry grow up as as the movie is happening, literally in real time. I feel like literally this movie is saying this is where we're going, not just purely in terms of the plot, but in terms of like the style and that. And it should be said, I think this was this Frankenheimer's first, and we haven't seen The Train. We really want to.
Yeah,
I think it was his first movie he made after he came back from Europe to shoot that.
Probably.
And this obviously has a much more European take of like in terms of the European art cinema, the 50s and 60s.
It reminds me a lot of Godard and Antonioni.
I think I'd read it somewhere, and I know in Scott Tobias's Dissolve review he gave of this, he compared this a lot to the Twilight Zone as something as well.
And another thing, and I think it definitely is that. Another thing I find interesting about that too is that Rod Serling wrote the screenplay to 7 Days in May. I don't know if there's a correlation between that, but
they at least knew each other to some degree.
It feels very much like a Twilight Zone episode, like what the Planet of the Apes would in a way too. But Rod Serling actually wrote the screenplay of that.
Anyway. I saw it was one of the articles we read. Where it said that this was almost like a Twilight Zone episode directed by Jean-Luc Godard, which I think is a fascinating way of putting it. And for me personally, like I'm actually very fascinated with 60s cinema, but I don't, as a whole, love it. There, excuse me, of course, films and filmmakers, and actors and actresses I love from the period. But in a weird way, I'm much more fascinated by the 50s and the 70s, the decades on either side of it. But it is undeniably a very important moment because this is literally the death throes of the old studio system is happening at this moment. And to that point of what you said earlier, that's why a lot of these movies are really bloated. They're competing with TV. They're like, we got to cram in as many people as possible because we got to give them something that...
they got to get their money's worth. They're going to get their money's worth. The idea because they could just sit and watch TV,
and even like a lot of old movies are being shown on TV at this time too. So they're even competing with themselves.
Well, and not to make this too current, but we're other than COVID going on in general, we've really been seeing that with what theaters want to show anymore. They're only showing the Marvel films. They're only showing the Meg.
Disney, big Disney live action remakes.
And whatever the hell they show. They're not showing First Cow. Because nobody's going to come out of the house to go see that because they could just sit in front of Netflix.
Because there's something they'll watch it on Netflix. So why would they get out of the house?
Why would we try to make more money for something they would want to watch anyway? I wonder. Anyway.
And to me, I think I can speak for both of us. We have the absolute opposite opinion. Well, if we're even going to see some of these movies at all, why wouldn't we just see it at home?
Because they're just going to pile up on the streaming service,
right?
And we're not going to do that.
Why not get out of the house to see something that's just like it's just a little smaller, a little more thoughtful, that needs the business, quite frankly, also. It's like, I'm starting to see this, frankly, on a more moral level, in terms of how am I spending my money? Am I spending it on trash, or am I spending it on something that
or
actually...
Or are you spending it on Zack Snyder's Justice League.
Right,
We're not going to be talking about that anymore now, so let's move on.
I would say something else. I'm just going to move on. Who cares? Cultural terrorist Zack Snyder. Anyways, and so, like, again, this period of 60s Hollywood is very fascinating to me, but again, I think oftentimes of the first movies I think of are some of these kind of, even some I like, these kind of big, bloated, let's try to get people back into the theater, while, of course, we're on the fringe, or on the cusp, literally a year later from this movie, of The Graduate, of Bonnie and Clyde, 2 years after that, Easy Rider, that really fully kicks off the whole new Hollywood era. Which is, of course, also my favorite period of cinema. Of great many that I love every year in its own way. But, and so again, that's what's fascinating to me is that, like you said, that, Butch Cassidy is kind of, when was that, 69?
69, because that came out the same year as The Wild Bunch, too.
And so, something like Butch Cassidy, while that's kind of going in the new Hollywood direction, it should be said is also using stars who are already pre-established, like Paul Newman, who had been in existence for some years. And I think that's like what
and it is a comedy as well, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So,
I just think both of those movies are good examples of, okay, we're going to try to do a type of movie that's been done before, whether it be there are 1,000,000,001 westerns made by that point. This is like the Hitchcockian thriller.
Yeah. Because also it should be said about the 60s that Hitchcock had made Psycho, he had made The Birds, he had made Marnie, all in the 60s. And those were a little bit before this, and those are still very much studio movies, but they are very pushing in that direction.
I was going to say this. I'm glad you brought this up.
Yeah.
I don't think this movie is really possible without Psycho.
No.
I think, Psycho's groundbreaking for a variety of reasons. And, there were a decent number of black and white movies still being made in the 60s, but, a lot of people, when they think of, like, 60s cinema or 60s black and white, Psycho is one of the first movies that comes to mind. Yeah. And I feel like that movie, this is based on a novel as well, I think.
It is.
Right.
Yep.
And, Psycho itself was this literary adaptation.
Right.
And it should be said in terms of, for, quote, genre movies or horror movies, this movie was kind of a big deal. It's like, it's going to be a, quote, genre movie, but it's going to take it a little more seriously, or it's going to try to be a little bit more elevated than the traditional horror genre.
By the way, I wanted to shout him out because I didn't know who he was. John L. Russell was a cinematographer for Psycho, so great job on him because he never gets brought up, I'm sure. But
what else has he made, actually?
I have no clue. That's what I was going to look. Not a whole. Well, it looks like a lot of random stuff. Beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
I wonder if he even. I know that
random things.
I think that Hitchcock heavily used a lot of people who worked on Alfred Hitchcock Presents. I wonder if he go down if he's got a television. No, it doesn't.
That's it.
Okay,
yeah.
I don't know.
Anyway,
if he might not have been or not, but
that's what he's most known for.
Okay.
He earned an Academy Award nomination for that. Extensive TV work. That's it.
So I feel safe assuming that he probably did a little bit of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. But again, I don't know if this movie is really possible without Psycho coming before. And again, Hitchcock in general, this is very, like I said, that's what I think about with Frankenheimer. I think he's like a director who came up and studied and knows the work of Alfred Hitchcock and is like, okay, I'm going to do that, but a new version of that. What's the new direction that this is going to take?
Right.
And so to that end, again, I think that's one of many reasons why this movie is fascinating.
Yeah.
And like I said, I feel like I'm literally watching the industry actually change over the duration of the movie itself, which is always an exciting thing to see.
And as far as I'll kind of give a little mini lecture on this really quickly before we move on, talk about the movie a little bit more in general, and then moving on to the movie itself. That I think this film, Seconds, and John Cassavetes' Faces in 1968, only 2 years later. Wow, excuse me, my stomach was rumbling for some reason. Because I'm talking about all these movies I love. I'm hungry. But that was only 2 years after this, and it was being made actually around the time this sort of came out because that movie kind of had a long production history because it was definitively independent. But I think they're two of the best expressions of my fascination of conservatism and its reaction to liberalism or the counterculture. That these are these older men, both he and John Marley in that film, don't really want anything to do with that. Roger Sterling is another version of this in Mad Men. I think of they're these Republican conservative establishment people, very older white men who were businessmen, but they had this kind of itch in the back of their mind. They want to engage in this counterculture in these very kind of strange ways. That they ultimately, in the end, especially with Roger Sterling, because I think that's what's interesting. Another little Mad Men lecture here. What are you going to say something about John Marley? I was just going
to say that I was looking about John Marley's age. Yeah. He actually served in World War II. That's a lot of Greatest Generation guys that are kind of coming into conflict with that generation between the baby boom generation and the baby boom itself, I feel like. But that's all I was looking about.
But that with those types of people, like specifically, like I said, we'll say about Roger Sterling, his real ending in Mad Men, I think, he's in the last half season of season 7, but I think the very end, his kind of final real ending in the show is when he goes to find his daughter at that commune, and unlike his ex-wife, who immediately wants to leave, and is like, well, I'm not dealing with her because she's just crazy and whatever, he's trying to understand it and trying to work with her on it, but in the end wants to drag her away and says, this is over, time to come back to real life now. and she pushes him down in the mud, and he kind of gets up and walks away defeated. And that whole show, he's been, taking LSD.
Yeah.
He's been hanging out with these hippie people. He's been taking drugs and drinking and doing all these different things. But ultimately, it comes down to he is that conservative man.
Well, just that image of him in
is.
his blue suit,
Right.
caked in mud.
Yeah.
That says more in an image than
Right, and none of that
any
is
of the writing
conveyed.
could, like,
That's all Matthew Weiner's genius.
Yeah.
But that's what I think. What I love about this movie and Faces too is that, and specifically Faces, my read on that movie specifically is that the movie opens with them viewing some like what's the La Dolce Vita of the commercial field, as they say. Whatever that film is, they're supposed to be watching.
Yeah.
The movie starts, and then it starts with that, and then the actual movie starts.
Yeah.
Which I read is like this is that John Marley's character's vision of, oh, I want to go break out and be the crazy wild man that these people are.
Yeah.
But he ultimately comes home at the end of the day and has to deal with him and his wife's failing marriage. So all that, I think Seconds is a bit, and this obviously is that, about trying to become a younger man, that you're tired of your boring life. But in the end, you ultimately say, no, I kind of want to go back and try something new, which is the old thing. So I think this Seconds is about a lot of things, a lot of very specific things that are very broad or specific. But that's something I find to be one of the most interesting things, because that's something I'm fascinated by personally, is that very specific moment. And that's something that happens, the midlife crisis thing happens all the time. And that's a very general version of that. But there was a very specific time in American history where things were changing so fast, and there were so many of these people who would watch on TV and look at people getting beaten in the street at the DNC in '68 in Chicago and say, I don't care about that. That has nothing to do with me. Screw those people. And yet, in their mind, they would still want to do something like this in their own fantasy land and want to do these things. But they almost would feel inadequate of doing those, or that's just the fantasy they have they'll never enact, or that they would fail in doing so. But anyway,
another subtext, I think, to what I mentioned earlier with the Greatest Generation, is a thing I'm really fascinated by, their evolution over time. Yeah. And a great many of them have now passed on. But one other thing that fascinates me about these period of movies, and Frankenheimer especially, but also even not Red Alert, but Failsafe, excuse me, is that in both 7 Days in May and in Failsafe, this is kind of maybe going off on a tangent, but that the president in those movies are played by classic Hollywood stars,
Frederick March
and Henry Fonda, who represent the purest, most authentic versions of like positive, calm authority. And in the Frederick March version, or in 7 Days in May, it all ends up seemingly working out in the end, in terms of like, oh, he was able to pull the country together and he was able to reunite everybody. Decisively less so, I think we can say, in Failsafe in terms of the ending of that movie. But this, and in his own way, of course, John F. Kennedy was the first Greatest Generation candidate and winner, And so, in general, I think that's something that really fascinates me about the 60s, is that Greatest Generation type or era, trying to deal with what is this time period and how is it affecting me and how is it challenging my own authority or personal kind of ideas, So I think that's one of many reasons why not only Frankenheimer's work in general, but this movie and his distillation also fascinates me. And so I think this is only the second full time I've seen this movie, actually, I believe, which is the second time that's happened this week. Trust me, the one next week I've seen many, many times. What do you remember your first impressions of the first time you saw this and what it impact it had on you?
I would have, and this movie kind of got a second life. How apt! Got kind of a second life when it got put out on Criterion. It should be said that the movie itself was kind of a failure, both critically and commercially. It only made about $1.7 million. I don't know how much it was made for, but it wasn't a success. It kind of got forgotten.
It should be said that same year, though. We haven't mentioned this yet. Grand Prix came out, which we both love.
Yeah, we watched Grand Prix recently this last year for the first time, which is another Frankenheimer film, which is literally about a Grand Prix, and that's all it's about.
And it is very different in some ways. I mean, his sense of style and action and the way he shoots things is very much there, but it is a very, very different movie, but also great.
No, I mean, that's another example of, I mean, nothing can touch the Jurassic Park Schindler's List in 1 year, but that's pretty close. I mean, doing two totally different movies that are that great. One a big action movie in color, and another one a smaller
black and white.
White. Although the time limits kind of switched for that as far as how long they are, the running times.
Yeah.
But I don't remember. Actually, this movie's lived in my consciousness for so long since I saw it that I actually don't remember exactly what I thought of it the first time. But I was certainly shocked. It's just one of those movies. It's so visual. It's hyper visual. Everything is almost to the extreme, although there's not a lot of dialogue in it. And it's a pretty quiet movie in some ways until it's not. And I mean, it's hard to say. It's funny. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite movies, like in my top 10 or necessarily, but it is probably my top 30 or 50 somewhere. It's a movie that has made a drastic impression on me, and made me fall in love with Frankenheimer, and has made me fall in love in some ways with somebody like Samuel Fuller.
I don't know if we mentioned him yet, but
I'm kind of obsessed with these filmmakers who are making movies that are on such the cutting edge. And I mean, some other movies that were made in the 60s that I love are Shock Corridor and The Naked Kiss.
I think this and Shock Corridor make a really great double feature.
And those are, specifically, let me say, with the only other feeling I've ever gotten close to this movie, of watching a movie of this time, is probably The Naked Kiss. You remember the opening of that movie, where the actress, I can't remember her name, it escapes me, but look that up. Is beating her pimp with and her wig comes off.
I remember,
It's literally one of the most shocking things in any movie I've ever seen. What was
Constance Towers.
Constance Towers, and she was also in Shock Corridor as well.
She's still alive right now.
Oh, really? Well, good for
She'll
her.
be 88 in May.
But stuff like that, and I'm just like, and if you've never seen The Naked Kiss or Shock Corridor, please go watch those two. That would be something we might would eventually do on here. I don't know.
Well, he's another director I feel like we didn't mention, but is certainly of this oeuvre.
And I love Fuller even more than I love Frankenheimer, but they're pretty close actually. But I love Sam. Everybody loves
Fuller's
Samuel
another
Fuller,
one
but
who made a lot of movies going as he got older and even into the 80s. And I don't know if he was really making movies by the 90s.
No, I think he died in like the late 80s or something. And I mean, like, he made stuff in the 80s like White Dog, which is another one of the most shocking movies I've ever seen. And that movie was similarly kind of lost for a long time.
He died in 97.
Yeah, so I don't think he did make anything in the 90s, though. I think he kind of quit.
And the Big Red One, I think that was one of his last bigger movies, and then White Dog was 82.
But anyway, so this movie's influenced me in so many ways, made me go in different directions. That obviously I loved the 60s and loved New Hollywood before this movie that I saw it, but it really, like I said, just made an impression on me that was very definitive. And
I know that I'd kind of sort of barely heard about this movie in the ether. I think its Criterion Collection release helped. And it should be said, we just went back and watched. There's this really random, awesome special feature of all people, Alec Baldwin. Just kind of talking about this movie and kind of the overall effect it had on him.
The greatest films are always films that when they come on, you're going to watch them. You take a shower, and you come out, and your wife says, "We got to go shopping." And you go, yeah, we're going to go get that shopping done. And then you're sitting there in the bathrobe, and the TV comes on, and there's Seconds. And you're going to sit down, you're going to watch that movie until your wife screams at you and makes you get up. Some movies you got to be in the mood for. Other movies, they put you in the mood. They take you hostage in a way. And that was John's films. John's films took you hostage.
You know what my favorite thing about that is that he's like, whenever Seconds comes on, you just have to watch it. And I'm like, when is Seconds on TV? You know, I'm like, what are you talking about? But I mean, that's a great.
Alec Baldwin's actually there's been several instances of him being very intelligent and cogent about movies. I know what I love. There's this clip of him on Conan. Asking Conan, like, did you see the Godfather reunion? It's streaming on Facebook, and it's like you could tell if he wasn't some big actor, he would literally just be some huge movie nerd, like wanting to watch the Facebook live feed of the like anniversary of the Godfather films, and doing impressions of all the people. But he just happens to be this big actor. You know, it's just kind of randomly endearing about him. But
love that whole clip though. That's hilarious to me.
Anyways, so. you had really been a disciple to me on this movie and been talking about,
Yeah.
this movie seconds, you gotta see it, and then I did. And again, unfortunately, this is only the second time I've seen it, but I've actually thought about it a lot over the years and just haven't had the time, but I have, but haven't found the time to watch it again, and so I'm very fascinated to re-experience it. But yeah, it immediately just was kind of like a mini atom bomb going off in my head of really telling and communicating to me a lot of these things I've already said about its place and time in the culture. Just felt really radical, but again, this is a Paramount Pictures production. This is not like some frou-frou foreign company or something making this movie. This is Paramount Pictures, and I think it speaks to the fact that the old Hollywood system is falling away, that they were trying to do a little bit of riskier stuff and do something like this. And to that point, again, this has kind of become a cult classic. And has kind of now found its new audience and a little more beloved now. Other than a lot of other things we've said, what can you maybe attribute that to yourself, just yourself as a fan?
I think it is so shocking. I think maybe people recognize that. That's what I recognize in it, maybe, is that it's a total otherworldly experience. And I really... And we've been doing a lot of advocations recently. Yeah. If you've never heard of this movie, I hope you will check it out. And I think everybody will be shocked the first time they see it. You think you've seen a lot of stuff and you've been prepared for a movie like this, but it really is something else. Cult classic, I guess it's just because of what it's about, and that I think a lot of people can see themselves in this movie in different ways. Now, I'll go ahead and say, I don't see myself in this movie that much because I'm not, I don't want to attach too much to this, but I'm not that depraved as a human being, some of the things that happen in this movie, and I'm not that desperate, but I'm also a young man.
Right.
I don't know what it's like yet to be an older person, and I think it's very valuable at people in any moment in their life to kind of think about, what if I could be another person? And obviously, this movie is not advocating for that. So, I don't know. I think it's because it just is so idiosyncratic. It just is so attractive to a viewer in so many ways. So, I don't really know what the answer to that is, but for me, just that it is what it is so different.
I think I think a lot of it for me, as far as a lot of the reason it's probably become this fetishized object over the years in a good way. Fetishized in a good way. It is kind of a horror movie, but like a different kind of horror movie.
Yeah.
And that immediately, I think, was probably for a lot of people, I'd imagine, who like horror movies or like thrillers or sci-fi, a gateway into experiencing a more kind of thoughtful and or foreign cinema, alternative cinema. I think in a lot of ways,
thematically and stylistically.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of it too, for me, the appeal of it is the historical context in which it evolves out of and reflects, and is also predictive of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we covered a lot of stuff talking about it. So
I think this is our longest intro, but this movie deserved it.
Among the longest, yeah. So we're going to take a brief break, and you're going to hear a beautifully 60s trailer of this. I would actually encourage you to seek out the actual trailer itself, which you can easily find on YouTube, because there's a lot of title screens and stuff in it that you can't really see in the trailer. But
and also we've said this a million times about the movie itself. Watch the movie. Even if you don't listen to us talking about it, watch it, because it is so visually expressive in what it is, and it's kind of I know, like I said, I appreciate that a lot of people have been listening to this podcast, just listening to it, but you're really going to be missing something. If you don't watch it. So
I would agree. So we're going to take a brief break. You'll hear that trailer, and when we come back, we'll start up on John Frankenheimer's film from 1966, Seconds.
Bold, bizarre, terrifying. Rock Hudson, in an astonishing change of pace, stars in Seconds. Rock Hudson as a second, freed from all responsibilities, now ready to taste new pleasures. Rock Hudson as a man who buys for himself a totally new life, a chance to begin again. Every man's dream since time began.
As soon as these people leave, I'm going to attack you. I want you to know that.
I'm counting on it.
Rock Hudson as a man who lives the nightmare of being a second.
Why are you all staring at me like that? Hey, John. Hey, John. Hey, John. Why are they staring at me like that?
They know.
They know what?
They're like you. Reborn.
Oh, Laura!
And here we are. We're back. So it should be said this movie was made kind of as the production code itself was breaking down, but it was retroactively given a rating, right? It
was rated R. And there's that I know of. There's no the reasons speak for themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, but
there's some nudity in this.
I think that's the main
frankly
reason.
Shocking for kind of a movie of this time period.
You know, something I want to say about that now before we get to that later is that like a couple times when I would watch this when I first saw it, and I saw when I've seen this movie, I don't even know how many times I've seen it, but it's actually quite a bit. I would skip that whole scene. Mm-hmm. Because not even because of the nudity that it offended me so much, it was just so chaotic.
Yeah,
I couldn't.
It's reminiscent of some, Peck and Posh, or moment, like in Straw Dogs. I think of some sequences in that are just like jarring to watch.
Yeah, and like now, I mean, obviously we're not going, and I don't do that anymore. But when I was first seeing it, it wasn't like I said that it was the new, and plus it also kind of bored me at the same time. That section, and it kind of still does in a way, actually. But anyway, we'll talk more about that when we get there. But
it should be said we're watching again this from the Criterion.
Yep.
So depending on what method you're watching this, which I know the Criterion now is the most widely available version of it on home video anyways. Right. But just be prepared that the sync might be a touch off if you are watching
it. Because they have to show the Criterion logo beforehand.
Yeah, so anyways, we're going to hit play on this version in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, play.
And we'll be doing some Criterion movies.
Yeah, we already got some scoped out. I know our very next film is actually going to be a Criterion release as well.
Much newer film. Yeah, if you want to try and figure out already what it's going to be. But.
Again, the Paramount Picture analogy, it's striking.
This movie's already going to slit my throat.
Thinking about some of those Hitchcock movies of the late 50s, early 60s, Vertigo, I remember, was a Paramount release.
I think there's a lot of things to say about the opening credits of this movie. One thing that's important, I think, is that some of it was used in the opening credits of Martin Scorsese's Cape Fear. Some of the images there, I'm pretty certain they're the same.
I believe that was, I think, one of Saul Bass's last.
Right, so he must have just reused some of that then.
And I think that one article had said that he had actually shot, all this stuff himself.
Yeah. Which is the scariest stuff in the movie, other than the ending, maybe, I guess.
Beginning and the ending,
Imagine you see this in 1966, and you're already like, what
are these
this?
hotheads up to now?
Yeah.
What I love, too, is it's taking very familiar objects, like the ear, like the mouth, and just very, garishly distorting them. The ear, old David Lynch. Here we go.
Yeah.
We'll go in the ear.
I wonder what he would think of this movie. I'm sure he probably loves it.
Yeah.
But,
Mistaken identity. Or like
Mistaken identity. He probably also likes that they took a Rock Hudson type of that type of actor and did this movie. Like, that archetype has been shattered. This image is... What?
Sterling Hayden, what?
Yeah. Who is that?
Communist infiltration. We were just
Yeah.
saying in between this that we didn't really mention Kubrick at all, and I think he's maybe the greatest director of the 60s.
Yeah, no, he is, yeah.
In terms of even a movie like Lolita that we're not necessarily the hugest
I'm
fans of.
I'm especially not a fan of that movie.
That movie's at least going for it.
Yeah.
But Strangelove and 2001. 2001 is
Yeah.
literally one of the crown jewels of cinema, so very 60s director.
Jerry Goldsmith.
Yeah. Who, I guess the most famous score he ever did was Chinatown, I guess, because that's always
That's one of the best scores,
Yeah.
I think, ever, too, yeah. Written and conducted by Jerry Goldsmith.
That's from specifically
that
the Mummy
image, wow.
VHS intro. From the Mummy from 1999.
Should be said as well that I think there were a couple different people who helped finance this movie. One of them randomly was Kirk Douglas, who's not in the movie, interestingly, but that he had worked with Frankenheimer, multiple times. But
I can't remember the details of this.
Yeah, it was in 7 Days in May.
But it was in 7 Days in May, but also there was another Frankenheimer movie he was in before that, I think, even.
Yeah, I don't even know what it is.
I can't remember the details of the story, but I think that Frankenheimer had a strained relationship with Burt Lancaster.
Yeah.
And that Douglas brought and convinced him to be in 7 Days in May, and it was and they actually ironed over that. But then Kirk Douglas had a falling out with John Frankenheimer or something. I can't remember the details, but
Of course, that kind of camera on the guy. I don't know what you call that, but
yeah, basically.
We read a lot in multiple things. We read it talked about how they had like a Playboy model undressing in the terminal so that people would be looking at that and not noticing they were filming this. It's like, okay, but yeah, whatever you got to do. I mean, Seconds was made because of that. So
yeah.
That's so weird looking the way that looks.
It should be said, too, that in general in the 60s, you started to see a little bit more, like actually not on like studio sets as much and more on location shooting, and a lot of Frankenheimer movies utilize that technique and idea. And then another movie filmmaker that this movie is kind of predictive of is Alan J. Pakula, who is in the 70s is one of the most widely regarded and beloved like paranoid thriller filmmakers.
I'd say another one maybe too this way even after that as well, David Fincher.
The Game.
Which I guess I'm a big fan of these movies because The Game is my favorite Fincher movie.
It's up there for me as well.
Another one is Girl with Dragon Tattoo, but
whoops.
Who you be? Am I being followed? Well, not anymore, but all right.
I forget too all the organs in the score for this. It's like makes it automatically feel much more gothic. Yeah. Again, there's huge fans of Mad Men. A lot of scenes on trains of people trying to escape this or that. Very famously, Pete Campbell, reading
Gravity's Rain. Excuse me, Crime Lot 49.
Crime Lot 49,
which is, at least at this moment, my Twitter profile pic, if you're looking for me out there somewhere. There's that motorcycle again outside. I don't know if anybody heard. Yeah, another thing I like about the way this movie looks, especially there's those scenes when he goes to that slaughterhouse here early on, that and the operating room scenes, this like very clinical, detached look at anatomy, and it's very like sickly looking almost, but it's very weird, especially these early parts of the movie and the later parts, but in the middle when they're in California it's a little less looks like that. But He is nervous.
And I think even speaks to Frankenheimer's skill. I think even setting this up early on in the film, on the visual level, this establishes for him the world's taking place outside a window.
Yeah.
It's not something he really interacts with. That's something's going on over there, and that I maybe want to be a part of that. Maybe I don't. I don't know, but I just want to try. You know?
Yeah.
Already visually, he's kind of setting up that idea, establishing that idea. See how that guy just effortlessly jumped right off that?
Yeah. Wow. I thought this in Mad Men, and since I've seen this, just what a boring existence this has to be to drive back and forth to work, go on a train. I know a lot of people do these things, so I'm not trying to be like, oh, whatever, but I'm just be like, oh my God, like, ugh.
Yeah.
That urban lifestyle.
Yeah.
I drive my Jeep everywhere.
Yeah. Here's his wife. Here he is with his wife.
Good day.
Yeah.
Very productive. Got the roses out and back all trimmed.
Another thing random about this movie is that they apparently had so many cameras shooting that it was so loud that they had to re-record most of the dialogue, which makes the movie feel even weirder because it's all re-recorded. You can tell, like, you know, which a lot of movies do that, but this one in particular, I think it works is one of its strengths that it does that. It just sounds really weird.
Something wrong?
No.
That phone call last night?
I know, it's interesting when we mentioned Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf earlier. It's like, that's a very different portrait of a marriage also. But that, this is a lot of things left unsaid.
Yeah, that
nothing's left unsaid.
I think everything's left on the table in that movie. Yeah.
Everything put out on the table. How's that? Now,
whatever.
Yeah, you get it.
I don't care.
Nothing left unsaid. Yeah.
They said a lot of stuff that you keep in the bedroom, like.
So we get further away.
Yeah,
okay.
Calm down.
He has no time for art, as Don Draper once said.
It's me again, Margaret. As Ray Stevens would once said.
Right.
Stop saying that. Charlie Evans is dead. I want you to stop this or be forced to call the police.
Art, there are 2 trophies on the fireplace near the tennis team picture. Pick up the phone and walk over to them. Go ahead, you know the code.
And it's not like he's exactly the spitting image, but Rock Hudson seems like a good...
Yeah.
Or they seem like a good pair of, like, kind of, sort of, almost looks like that guy, but de-aged,
Yeah.
We're both wearing the same kind of wristwatch. Remember we gave them to each other after winning the doubles at Princeton? Okay.
Tennis guy.
So, yeah, we could tell earlier that it was in New York, but especially if you're going to Princeton, you're going to be an Eastern establishment. Boob, basically.
Fidelio.
You scratched it there, down in the locker room after we won the finals. Remember? With your belt buckle.
So obviously he's convincing him that he's this person that he, was supposed to be dead. Okay, now.
All right, all that crap is done.
Anyway.
I guess he's supposed to be the shorter guy in the picture. I can't really tell who's supposed to be who there, but...
Well, I got a fish on the wall. Maybe a bowling trophy's about there. I can't tell what that is. Or tennis, maybe.
Goodbye. Dial tone.
Is it that cold again?
No. Stop cross-examining me every time the phone rings. Understand?
Another thing I think is interesting about these scenes, obviously up until this point in so many movies, they didn't want to show a married couple in the same bed, but this actually works to the point of, no, they are apart.
Right.
And it's like, this is a point where they're starting to not do that as much anymore. Now, in European films, I mean, they give a crap about something like that, you know, but like in American films, that was still something that was kind of
taboo.
Yeah, but this, it actually like has a point to why that is.
It does
it's
work.
Very interesting that it's at a time when that was starting to change in movies. So.
Any fever?
Still faithful.
Make an appointment to see Dr. Hogan tomorrow. Promise?
Occurred to me yet another name we didn't really bring up was Otto Preminger, who we've seen some of his movies relatively recently and quite like. But
yeah, Bunny Lake is Missing is another movie that reminds me of some of these. Not as good as a lot of these, I don't think, but it's still
almost looks painful to both of them.
Alec Baldwin talked about this scene in that clip, or the longer version of that clip we had. About this is the moment when he decides that he is going to be interested in whatever this is, because he's almost like, what was it he said? He's repulsed that someone would be attracted to him or something, which is something I've never thought about or heard in anything, but I'm sure you know, very, very serious movie we got going on here. Not a lot to laugh about.
You said, too, that I know that there's a Frankenheimer commentary track on this Criterion.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I think he recorded 97, I think it said.
Go listen to him instead.
It's too late. You're already involved in this. But.
Part of the first part. That's a no good.
Even he's like, what am I doing? Like, this is boring.
I must say, I do love my job as a substitute teacher right now, but sometimes you'll find yourself in the middle of doing things and you're like, why am I doing this right now? Like, you know,
the worst feeling in the world is when you're mid-lecture and you just all of a sudden have that, like, wait, where am I? What am I doing? And I'm sure everybody has, and you're like, in your middle of talking, and you fake your way through what you're saying. Yeah. But basically, you have that, like, you know.
Don't worry, they're not paying attention anyway.
Yeah.
Sadly.
Oh, how encouraging! Well, they don't care anyway.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, a lot of them do, but you know, but they're some of them aren't paying attention enough where they would even know what's going on with you. You know.
Like I said, those moments happen here and there, and I just fake my way through it and then get through it. But it's always kind of scary.
Yeah. What, that or this? The way this old man
both,
looks.
Yeah. Steam hissing. What a place to run this whole thing out of.
Yeah.
My name is Wilson. I was told to come here. Look, is this the place or isn't it?
Here anymore. I got it wrote down.
Cool.
You can tell they're all like, oh, you're those one of them freaks. Likes to do that weird
Certified
stuff.
freak, 7 days a week.
Mr. Wilson. Surely this isn't the... No, sir, please come with me.
Let's go, Frank. Move that truck on. Come on, hook it on, hook on. Move that beef off the line.
Now, I don't know if this was the point. I don't remember what point in the movie it is, but I guess now's the time to tell the Brian Wilson story.
Oh, yeah.
So, Brian Wilson, of course, from the Beach Boys, at this time, I guess, was in his period of, I mean, he's always had a lot of, mental health problems, different things. It was, I don't remember exactly what it is, if it's schizophrenia or what it is. Exactly.
No, that's only, he took drugs too, right?
Right,
so it's compounded by that.
But also, he does have
I'm
actual...
saying that compounds
right.
it and makes it worse.
But anyway, he went to go see this movie, and at the time, that was kind of, I guess, Pet Sounds was probably being made around that, or had already come. I don't remember exactly when all that came. Their records came out, but it was kind of at a point, a really bad point for him of kind of his paranoia.
Yeah.
And he came into the movie specifically at a moment, like I said, I don't remember which moment it is, where a character says, "Come in, Mr. Wilson," or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And he thought, I think, literally that Phil Spector, who recently, didn't he just die recently?
Yeah, relatively recently, yeah.
Who, has had all his murderous things going on. That he was one, I think, of supposedly one of the financiers for this movie.
Right.
And that Brian Wilson believed that he had it out for him. He had, worked with him at different times. And that this movie was some, I don't even know what you call it, against Brian Wilson or something.
Yeah.
And it was and that it freaked him out so bad he didn't go see another movie until E.T. the Extraterrestrial.
Which was 82.
Right.
Yeah, so it's
so that's another... One of the most paranoid people of all time and sees a paranoid movie.
I was going to say, it's almost too perfect as this movie for that to happen.
But I've always thought that's an interesting story. But,
yeah.
Anyway. Like I said, I don't remember what point in the movie that is that happens, but maybe that. I don't know.
Yeah.
And that that is so weird that he walked in at that exact moment, though.
I mean, it's easy to laugh at, but you're in a state of paranoia anyway.
Yeah, because I'm not even trying to make fun of the situation. It's fun. It's kind of a funny story, but it's very kind of serious, and about somebody's mental health, But yeah.
I wonder, during E.T., if he got turned off by talk of the extraterrestrial. He's, was that me?
Yeah. And I'm not one of those people who believes really that much in the idea of you can't make this stuff up, but that's one of those stories to me that I've always been like, that's too perfect to have been created by somebody, to not be true.
Offhand, do you know if, was it just purely Dennis Wilson that was the one that was in the orbit of, Charles Manson?
I think it was just him.
Okay, yeah. Or I didn't know if any of the other ones.
Not that I'm aware.
I don't know if Mike Love and him hung out, or Charles Manson, Mike Love. Which,
I think
go look up
Mike Love.
Go look up though Brian Wilson's current takes on Mike Love
are the best. Obviously, he's being drugged at this moment for a little project they have in mind, as we'll see. Going to work towards illicit dealings.
But again, all these shots are, even now, very disorienting, and especially for a 60s audience, would have been the strangest thing most of them would have ever seen, And
it's still one of the strangest things I've ever seen, I'd say, but... No audio, it says. Okay.
I guess, no, nothing's been...
right, because we're watching the subtitles, obviously, A
little bit of, kind of... German expressionism, cabinet of Dr. Caligari, kind of set design there.
Cabinet of Dr. Calgary.
Yeah.
So weird. It's a 1966 film.
That's for sure.
I'm gonna go. Like,
I'm on my way out. I'm gonna get away.
I'm gonna get away.
Which should be said. I'm gonna get away. For us personally, is similar to off-roading in the sense like it's more of a state of mind and a vibe. And typically, those who say they're gonna get away do not.
And he does not get away in this movie. Pretty definitively.
Seems like he does temporarily, but maybe not.
Well, yeah. But will you always make it though? Yeah. Won't they come for you? Like, I wonder where this exactly is.
Yeah,
it's like some nondescript New York like building, I guess.
Yeah, it's old MH.
Yeah, Murray. That close up.
Excuse me. I was wondering if you could. Excuse me. I'm trying to find. Excuse me. I'm trying to find my way out of the building. I have a gentleman here who wishes to leave the building.
What I really like too about the depiction of what's it called, The Company. His name.
Yeah, they never really say what it is.
Is that it's like some of this stuff plays on like the mad scientist trope. And this is much more, clean cut, much more corporatized. That whole idea of the classic mad scientist of like a Universal monster era movie, that's gone by the wayside. But now the mad scientists are in these nondescript office hallways. In some ways more frightening in the long term.
Or probably it's this moment. Who knows? I don't know. Like,
you get it.
Yeah. Because also, I would imagine it's early in the movie. I wouldn't think you get there that late. But I don't know. Like,
please sit down.
That's what's even weirder about it is that it would be, there you are, Mr. Wilson. Come in. Like, he's late.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, yeah, there you are. Come join us. Like, and I was like, what? Like...
Most of our clients are near them. Now, let me get this straight.
I was actually just curious how old Brian Wilson is. He's 78. He was born in 42.
Let me start by explaining the cost factor involved. To begin with, the procedures are rather complex.
I love that they never really formally offered him this. They're like, well, this is what's going on. This is what's going to happen.
As I was saying, the cost runs in the neighborhood of $30,000. I know this seems...
No, so it was $30,000.
Rather extensive cosmetic renovation by way of plastic surgery for you. CPS has to provide a fresh corpse that perfectly matches your physical dimensions and medical specifications. CPS? Oh, cadaver procurement section. But you sure you don't want this chicken? Absolutely sure. Oh, pity. The next step is the carefully planned obliteration of identifiable portions of the cadaver before it is found. Features, dental structure, fingerprints. We can't leave anything to chance. No, I guess not. Would you mind if... Please. Thank you. Now, there is...
I guess he's just paranoid at this point. Oh, that's going to be poisoned or something. Yeah. And like, well, he's going to eat it. So.
A simple accident, strangely enough, is costly.
How funny it'd be if it was poison.
Yeah, and he's like...
And then all of a sudden we see the same sequence but from that guy doing
and it's
something
like,
different.
why would we need to see that? Yeah.
Identification still can be made based on, as I say, general dimensions, plus a credible sequence of events, witnesses, etc. The whole thing must be very carefully staged. We guarantee a death of this kind. Excuse me. Delicious. They have a wonderful way of baking cheese on it so that it's very crispy. Now, there are...
The fire whistle's going off in our town right now. They're like seconds is being watched.
Yeah.
Like,
your body can be found. The victim of some kind of machinery, an explosion, a hunting misadventure.
a hunting misadventure.
Those are my favorite kind of misadventures.
For you, I had thought perhaps a hotel room fire. Would you like me to outline the circumstances? Oh, thank you. Oh, good. I was hoping you would agree. No, I mean, I can't be sure. Oh, well, of course. We can't expect you to decide all at once. Think it over. There's so much else to be done, Mr. Wilson, but if I may say so.
And I feel like now we're so conditioned and used to a lot of these evil corporations in movies or TV, like not getting a backstory into what they're all about. But I think at this time that was a different approach, where there wasn't some big elaborate backstory that was explained to you about why they're doing this or what,
because that's what's interesting to me. Obviously it is about money, I guess, ultimately, but it's like, what's the real reason to be doing that? Because for people who want to do it, I get it, you want to be a different person, but it's like, but what's your real goal as the corporation, other than make, and maybe it is they just make money, I don't know. But,
or that they're possibly subsidized by the government and are using this for Manchurian Candidate-esque operations, or like reprogramming people and or changing identities. I mean, it could be that kind of thing, but
doesn't really matter what it is ultimately, which is the point we're making, is that who cares, like, really, but okay, that's the comment you're gonna make on this. Like,
of course, the drug made it easier to manipulate you into the proper positions and attitudes. Rest easy, Mr. Wilson. You did not ravage our girl. Of course, the photographies are not too professional, but I think it's fair enough.
his voice kind of changed because he was
he a film critic, by the way? Just like earlier, he was talking about the staging.
Yeah, it's like,
the photography is not professional. Blah blah. Like,
so obviously they're blackmailing him to do it now.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, he just appeared like.
Old man.
He wanted me to tell you that rebirth is painful. He's going to say, so now it's blackmail, Mr. Wilson? What do you call it? Just kind of insurance. Isn't it easier to go forward when you know you can't go back? You knew that, didn't you? The minute you hung up, Charlie, after that first call. Sure you did.
He said, "You're insane."
Yeah, I mean, that much is clear, but yeah. But as they were explaining, basically they have to find another body to stage your death with, which we'll find out how they come up with those at the end of the movie. But yeah.
You always wanted it. You got another chance. Heck, nobody's gonna miss you either. My wife. What about her? What are you to her now?
I am not a human being. I'm an animal. Or as the YouTube poop said, I am not a human penguin.
Yeah, YouTube poop for the
Batman Returns. Yeah, in case you have no clue what I'm talking about, or why I'm talking about it, I don't know. How did I get here? As David Byrne once said. Oh man. I mean, once in a lifetime. Is it a Seconds-esque tale?
Yeah.
I mean, there's water at the bottom of the ocean.
This is not my beautiful house. This is not my beautiful wife. So,
see.
Excuse an old fool prying, son. What does it all mean?
Oh, he's waiting for him to answer.
Mean anything now anymore? There's nothing anymore, is there?
I mean, what are you referring to, sir? Sir?
Expect to be president of the bank before too long. I have my boat in the summer. We're friends.
Anything at all.
Really, one of the most evil moments in this movie, maybe, is just like,
is that your life?
Like anything though, like yeah.
Never thought much about it.
I mean, even though he's on to something, I guess, like, but you know.
I leave Emily pretty much alone to do what she. We get along, as I said.
Get along.
That's a measure of our lives.
So the guy smiles. Oh, so you are utterly worthless, right?
Yeah.
He's like,
yeah.
Last few years. Hardly ever.
I was getting kind of bored.
Yeah. Can we move
I
on?
don't know why I'm telling you this.
Like you want to. Go on.
All right. What is it again?
Showed much affection. As I said,
This has all been done in one take, by the way.
Yeah.
Boat.
and
This is what happens to the dreams of youth.
If he just starts naming objects, he owns like boat, car, Scrappy Doo bobblehead. Which Scrappy Doo was not in existence this time, but I'm just saying, you know.
Maybe like Mighty Mouse. I don't know. By the way, do you ever look at the Andy Kaufman Mighty Mouse hat, whatever that even is, and you're just like, what even is this supposed to be?
Well, you can say that with a lot of things he does.
Yeah.
I say with mostly respect.
Yeah, but I'm just like, what? Like, the best thing he ever did was read all the Great Gatsby out loud, and people went, that's commitment, you know, like.
And you know, as that's depicted, you know, in Man on the Moon.
Yeah. There's like a couple people still there.
And some of them are sleeping.
And he like bows at the end. Like, yeah. Anyway.
How long that would take?
Probably like a couple hours.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's not that long of a book.
Right, yeah, it's not, I know it ain't super long, but still, like.
Yeah. Now let's throw your bar in the wood chipper.
Now, sign the contract, big boy. Sign the contract, as Mike Tyson once said. Mike Tyson.
That hat. It's an interesting, what would they call that? Movie thing. Ding. You know them things they do in movies sometimes? Is one of them.
I'm getting all cut up now.
No, puffed up. You need to go. What he was, but what will he become?
should be said, what? How long in the movie are we at this point, time-wise, exactly?
We are about 40 minutes.
Yeah, so, this...
We'll only really have about an hour left.
Yeah, it's the first time coming up that we'll actually see Rock Hudson, really.
In fact, I expect you to be prancing around here like a stud bull. Now, it's going to take a while, so try to be patient until we get you ready for the work again. Now, don't do that. You can't talk because we've extracted all your teeth and given you a complete vocal cord resection. Give the tissues time to pull together. Now, you got a new set of permanent teeth. In a week, you won't know the difference. Thank you. That's what hurts most right now. Everything's different. When the first healing's over, start conditioning for muscle tone. Yes, those two fingerprints. Mr. Wilson, even your signature. Little thing we did with the tensor ligaments of the hand. Vicularis oris started to sag, so we tightened the ligatures. Yeah. And we worked the manacle to square up the bone.
The big reveal.
Well, I never. Holy mackerel, I don't know how you boys do it. Doc, it's a masterpiece. Good work. He does it. You're all right, son.
This is so quiet, like it'll pick up any little thing.
Several months of physical conditioning. Process will be complete.
No audible dialogue. Yeah, this is a whole movie, I guess. Like. It is funny. It's like, first of all, of how much work they would have had to do to the body that you would need that, but that like he's still a old man in a young man's body. You like gotta
This Davilo guy, you said, this
he was that
in,
guy that
in
was like
camp.
brainwashing the Korean War prisoners. Yeah.
Permit me. I want a ball. Big red one.
Whoops. I'm afraid we picked this up a little too early. Sit down. We recorded these regressions under pentothal and caffeine sodium benzoate. First, there's always a touch of the infantile, but later on we progress to a more mature expressional infrastructure. Here we are.
What would you like to do most of all?
Of anything in the whole world?
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to be a tennis pro, I guess. Yes, that's what I'd like best of all.
And suppose you couldn't be.
Can't do that.
Yeah.
So.
Would you choose?
I guess I'd like to paint stuff.
Pictures?
Guess I'd like to paint stuff.
Well, I think the creative wish pattern is pretty self-evident.
I ought to be a painter.
Exactly. You see, painting allows you a basic creative outlet, as well as providing an environment in which these sublimations will have free vent.
I love when my sublimations have free vent. You know? Sublimations.
Certificates of study.
When you pass gas, basically, my sublimations have free vent. You know.
Abroad. Notices of first 6 one-man shows. The pictures.
I love they're also forcing him into what he's gonna do too. It's like, you know.
Subject. Not that I pretend to be a critic of painting.
These diplomas from reputable universities, they can't be forged.
Mr. Wilson, I assure you, every item is bona fide and valid.
Just from Harvard on the highway.
Very simple. You are already established in a position of some dignity. Oh, nothing conspicuous, just a solid, mildly successful sort of thing. You will be supplied with fresh paintings periodically. In time, you'll perfect your own style. Surreal, primitive, impressionistic, whatever. It will be a transition from this present work. You see, you don't have to prove anything anymore. You are accepted. You will be in your own new dimension. You're a bachelor, birth certificate, the only son of deceased parents and so forth. In short, you are alone in the world, absolved of all responsibility except to your own interest. Isn't that marvelous?
Your studio is in Malibu, California. Quite luxurious, very private. You'll make your own adjustment in your own way, in your own time.
That's what's so great about Rock Hudson's performance in this is so much of it's interior, and he's not real like. Tells a mixture of disappointment and fear that he's dealing with.
Almost every middle-aged man in America would like to have. Freedom. Real freedom. It's been a pleasure, Mr. Wilson.
Hello, Mr. Wilson?
Yes, thank you.
What was that, like a continuity error where they didn't have the pillow there?
Yeah. I was gonna say something about that, but I didn't know.
I wonder if that moment when Brian Wilson was watching the movie, if like a usher came by and like gave him a pillow, like, you know, how often did that happen throughout that viewing experience? You know.
She did a spin-off with him.
Yeah. Well, if he didn't say not one word the whole time.
Yeah.
Mr. Wilson, my name is John. I've been assigned to help you.
Of course, like saying Wesley Addies and all kinds of stuff, but yeah, I normally think of him in like this and Network.
Yeah. Between this Network, he's great at playing like corporate stooge.
Yeah.
Whereas our next film, we'll see the Bond Company stooge. You know.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, in case you can't figure that out, like, don't worry, you will in about another an hour. Like,
do you like it? I guess I got to.
Perhaps you'd like to freshen up and have a drink.
All right. do I have to? Or are you like making me do it? Like, yes. Like, whereas Catherine O'Hara once said, yes!
In Home Alone.
I am tired, and I am dirty.
I'm tired, and I'm dirty.
The fire is through here. I'll unpack these for you later.
Where the hell am I? Scranton.
Malibu.
Like, did you know that...
You see now Malibu's most wanted.
Did you know that there are things that happen in Scranton, PA, other than The Office?
Since when?
How long will you be here, John, sir? For as long as you need me. The company is fully aware that you may have problems at first and will spare no effort to help you solve. Thank you. Yes.
I love that nondescript Malibu location.
Yeah.
They all slay, you know.
Nondescript 60s attire.
I had a curious experience at the airport. What was that?
Should we say John Hudson, John Houston, Rock Hudson, excuse me, was a very big man. I think he's,
Yeah.
So I heard earlier he was like, what, 6'4"?
Yeah.
And, you know, he's just a physically large man.
His studio, in quotes. These are all direct quotes.
Yeah. I love that this was just all fabricated, so it's like, do they just have like a in-house artist, you know, just like actually did all these? Like,
Some in business, some right. No artists at all. I think you're the only one, sir.
I just thought this scene's kind of funny. Him like trying to paint.
yeah.
Sorry, because that's painting. Sometimes a thing I sometimes think, oh, I would like to maybe try that out. Well, I would, but I mean, frankly, the way some paintings look, it seems like they hardly put any work into it anyway. So, like, you know, nothing against, you know, art and painting, but like, I don't know, a lot of it just looks like nonsense to me. So, you know.
I'm not even saying I totally disagree, but you could take the one that looks the sloppiest and the most nothing, and I'm sure there'd be people spent hours on it.
Oh, no, I know, and I know they spend a lot of time on it, but, you know, like, oh, that's actually looking okay. But
it actually looks all right, you know, like, I think what he's doing looks like a human form anyways.
Well, if he always has the, like, you know, looking like, oh, I'm doing something for the house, but he's like watching it, you know.
That's really why he's there.
Yeah. Think about how weird that would be if you're a person, then you're another person.
You have an idea your whole life of what you look like, and then all of a sudden that's
like,
changed.
Well, wherever you go, there you are. There's another Confucius saying, you know, man with itchy butt, wake up with smelly fingers. Which a person who will remain nameless once said at a job I worked. And I like that person, so I'm not saying like, oh, nameless in a bad way. But like,
yeah, that was, should be said, not actually confused.
No,
Confucius.
but
I just want to just make sure the record's straight on that.
I don't know where they heard that, but you know,
Is
they knew it was
the initial
fake,
and the
but-
first name M on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I think it was. Yeah. I was making sure. Good old Target.
Yeah. Yeah, we both worked at Target for a little while. All right enough company to work for, I guess, but you know.
Yeah.
It's not a job I want to do my whole life personally, but
no, yeah, it was all right little job.
Pay pretty good money. Anyway, about Target.
Targets. Yeah.
Oh,
Peter Bogdanovich.
That's a really good movie. I watched that for the first time
last summer,
about a year ago.
Well, it should be said that our part of our opening theme is taken from that movie.
Yeah,
so
try to figure that out.
Yeah. I mean, you know, this movie's sadly got a lot of nice huts and fits in it. Yeah, this is one. This.
Hello?
Something about Salome Jens to me always looks like she's on the verge of saying, "You filthy rats!" The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Which came out in this year, didn't it, or something like that?
In Italy, anyways. Yeah. I think. Yeah.
I'm Nora Marcus.
You filthy rats. It should be said the situation in that movie that is in reference to is not funny at all, but the way the actress says it is funny.
With the end of 66 came out in Italy, yeah.
Italia.
Then at the end of the year, practically early 68 in the U.S. The look of confusion on his. He's like, whatever.
He really does look like an old man. It's
Yeah.
probably how I walk around half the time, and I don't even know it. Just like
the perpetually annoyed look.
Yeah.
What did it say?
You know, now living in the age of COVID, the mask kind of hides some of that. Yeah.
He told me to mind my own business.
I like that. Like,
That was my life. 2 boys, ages 10 and 12. Successful and indulgent husband. A beautiful house, complete with microwave oven, intercom.
What I like about her, other than just purely being a love interest, that she herself is someone, you know, is kind of looking to escape, you know.
Absurdum.
Escapism isn't purely a male fantasy, even though it primarily is depicted as one.
Dressed and left. That was 4 years ago.
It's kind of reminiscent of the female lead in Rain People, too.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting, she didn't have this whole thing happen to her as far as changing herself, but that she left her own life.
Yeah.
An artist? Why should you understand? You spent your whole life being.
You don't know anything about me, really.
Yes, I do. It's all right there in your face.
What is?
Now you're fishing.
No. Seriously.
This may hurt a little.
I agreed to take my chances.
Madam Marcus will read the leaves.
Huh. Like, oh, that Nancy Reagan crap. This would have been, I don't even know if it was known that she did that kind of stuff at this point, but, you know.
What kind of a man was he?
I guess Nixon was still, or no, he was. I guess had been vice. Did he become governor again after he tried to run for president and was vice president?
He tried to run unsuccessfully in '62 and didn't win.
Okay.
And thought about running for the '64 nomination and didn't. Decided to wait in the weeds. And probably the next book I'm going to read is the second volume of Rick Perlstein's so far excellent series on American conservatism. The first book, Before the Storm, which is about Barry Goldwater's '64 political campaign for president.
Yeah.
And then his next book, like I said, it's probably my next book I'm going to read is Nixon Land, which is kind of the most famous of the books.
Mm-hmm.
And then not Before the Storm. Invisible Bridge was number 3, and then recently last year Reagan Land came out. And it's actually interesting talking about books. I'm actually currently reading Norman Mailer's second novel, Barbary Shore, which I'm quite liking. And there's actually some flashes of that that are reminiscent of this in terms of that's kind of about this. It's different in a lot of ways, too.
Yeah.
It's like a World War II veteran who's an amnesiac living in a kind of boarding house apartment building, basically, and all these people he's interacting with. Anyways, it's just got a very, he's got this very kind of mysterious past that he's kind of makes up the own details to.
Yeah.
Kind of some of it's reminiscent to this, which puts me in the mind of.
Maybe that's part of turning the key.
Drunken Sailor they're playing. I would say so. Which many of us know as music used often in SpongeBob SquarePants, but let's say this is not appropriate for children. Movie in general, but especially this sequence.
One of the articles that said the real thing that this was shot at.
It's like a Bacchus festival or something.
Yeah, I want to find that name of that specifically. Feast of Bacchus Festival, held in Santa Barbara, California. Now, I remember when I first watched this, I was like, this was a very big diversion from what we've seen so far.
Yeah.
Literally, visually, but also, just we've been stuffy boardrooms or stuffy office buildings or just domestic settings, and all of a sudden is this, it's very different.
That zoom. Man laughing. All right.
Let's say something. Those articles that Frankenheimer had swim trunks on, and those got jerked off basically by very quickly. It was just
because he got in there with them and filmed it. Yeah. What a.
I can't help but think of the great video.
I'll just say this. Hopefully, this won't alienate any of our listeners. But what an annoying group of people to be around this would be.
Yeah.
I don't really feel that bad about saying it, but.
He was generally confused.
Yeah. Even the dog's like, what the hell?
Yeah.
People singing Drunken Sailor. Yeah, and I bet this movie was probably beloved in Europe if it was seen. But especially even people who wouldn't have liked it, they're like, "Oh, I like it now." We got nudity in it. Just like.
Like before there was Midsummer, there was.
That's the only mention we're gonna have of that again in this podcast again.
So far, it's been brought up twice in the overall run of this podcast.
I mean, I'm just another point of alienation coming up. You ready? Like, if you think that movie's better than this, like, I don't want to know you or see you. Goodbye. So no. Which most people probably haven't seen this. So
so it's not even.
So whatever. Yeah. So I can say it and shrug and say it is, and if you watch it, maybe you'll know. I don't know, but. It doesn't have anything to do with it. Like, yeah, I know. That's probably why it's good. Like, he's like, I don't know. I don't read any Allen Ginsberg. I don't know what you're talking about. Do what? Well, that like, oh yeah,
yeah.
Well, everything's all
just chilling. Like,
to quote Jeff Bridges in The Big Lebowski, nothing is effed.
One of two times in the future he'll be roughed up and thrown into something or thrown a certain way.
Yeah.
Hard to believe this is the preferable option.
Yeah. Stomp those grapes.
I heard about that.
Coughing. Chanting continues.
Again, this sequence reminds me a lot of... Remember that sequence in Straw Dogs where it's like at a birthday party? Or like...
And she's like remembering
reception or something.
Remembering herself being raped.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that. That's another really shocking movie. That I don't know that we'll ever do that movie on here.
Maybe some other Peck and Paws.
Yeah, no, we will probably. But and I really do, pretty much really liked it. Maybe love that movie. But yeah, that's not a movie I'm interested in doing a commentary of. But
and he finally kind of unwinds and says, "Okay, I'll be a part of whatever this is."
What a disgusting display. $1966, people.
The 60s. Well, they look pretty clean to be coming out of that. Come out of that.
Because that's not who they really are. They're only pretending to be.
They've been through so much together.
What, for like 20 minutes? Like, yeah.
That's how the movie's treated.
Yeah. Well,
I guess you go through that experience, I guess, that automatically sparks what seems like a lifelong connection.
Whether you would like it or not.
Yeah.
Now, we read, a couple times that different things. They actually got Rock Hudson drunk for this scene,
which is always a risky proposition. Yeah. There's some instances,
but it works out in the scene, I guess. So.
Mr. Wilson, may I present Mr. Mayberry?
He almost looks like quote another Mad Men phrase from Roger Sterling, like the groom on the wedding cake, popping off and like getting smashed, running right. Like at this point,
that look he gave that guy. But
just somebody that looks that traditionally handsome or attractive, just really drunk. You can tell, and just doing this thing, running right again.
You filthy rat. I'm thinking that every time I see her now for some reason. Just the way she talks, I think, reminds me of that.
I'm taking you to
The Casbah.
The Casbah.
Not the Casbah.
We've mentioned that song on this podcast, I think, at least 3 or 4 times now. I don't know why, but
they're just certain recurring themes.
Like Jonathan Dett. That's what we're going to start calling him.
Yeah, Jonathan Dett.
Johnny. Not Johnny Depp.
Yeah.
Jonathan Dett.
I really am. I want you to know that.
Imagine a Seconds remake with Jonathan Dett.
No. I don't want to imagine it.
Well, maybe you should.
Excuse me. Gosh, stomach's still.
It's not like you.
Oh, I know that.
Drunkenly.
I'm sorry. I just needed the added strength.
Well, that's silly. They're all wonderful people. Just give them a chance.
I've always wondered about, like, if you get drunk enough and you're also acting, like, what's the line between remembering your lines and then also genuine, like, well, I don't want to do this anymore, or, like, wanting to walk away from even doing the scene, like.
Yeah, I don't know. I was wondering about that.
I've embarrassed you.
No, you haven't.
Johnny.
I love
you. You're beautiful.
I feel like watching his face literally in this shot was a roller coaster of like, I don't like this, or I'm scared, I'm depressed, oh no, I'm happy.
I'm going to hold you to your promise, Mr. Wilson.
You're evil.
Yes.
God, how evil you are.
Yeah, specifically, like we said, the re-recording of the dialogue in this just makes it even weirder. Like.
It's a dirty lie. Watch out for this character. He's a lawyer. Harvard. I want you to know.
Really? Hey, that's a coincidence. No, thank you.
Me too. In fact, me too twice.
Hollow leg again?
Oh, really? That only makes me look like a piker. A veritable piker. Henry, you sneaking two-face, you.
Private joke.
Come on, Nora. Let's ditch these two sots. Hey, wait a minute. You can't do that.
There's no way to get away. You're going to stay right here.
Well, that's my woman. Hey. Hey! Hey, that's funny. That's very funny.
No, it's funny.
Is he really sneaky two-faced?
Yes. There's such a religious climate out
This woman.
Don't you agree?
She's like the sister of like Miss Piggy and
No.
oh, what's her name?
We changed sex.
Oh, no.
What's her name? That was M.
Good Lord, what's her name?
Yeah,
Judi Dench.
Judi Dench, yeah, whatever.
Dame Judi Dench.
Yeah.
spousal collateral, virgin sacrifice and all. I just love your sentence, Mr. Wilson.
How much has he drank? Like,
Well, you see, it all began with a big red ball. No. You see, I paint naked. Mrs. Builder. The only way to get at the truth.
How interesting.
Of course. See, in this way, my inner essence is revealed, and I am presented to canvas a direct relationship in my primeval state, without its sociological trapping. Hey, watch it! Take it easy.
oh look, you filthy rat. I mean, I understand he messed up your dress. Was like, you can buy a new one. I mean, it ain't that big of a deal. I mean, like, you know, she's acting like she's been murdered. Like, I mean,
You two heard the one about the shouting center. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt. Doing everything wrong.
Now don't pout. Mama will make everything better.
everybody's like, yeah.
Say, Hank. I was thinking about school with you before, and your house at Harvard wasn't by any chance Adams, was it?
Is anybody hungry?
Yeah, I am. Say, Hank. Hi. Hey, Hank. Here. Hank, actually, I'm not a Harvard alumnus either. That is, I used to be, but I'm not anymore.
What do you mean? Did you resign or something? Oh, that's priceless.
No! I did go to Harvard, you see? And I was an alumnus. But that was before you, Peter, and now I'm not anymore.
It's so not funny, but
Yeah.
him thinking it's as funny as it is makes it funny.
Resistless, a team sweeps Goulward. With the fury of the blast, we'll fight for the name of Harvard till the last white line is passed.
God, how much his breath would stink. Like,
Yeah.
Truth is, I just stopped being alumnus. Wilson, what? You and I must play golf sometime. Golf? Golf? Marcus Wilson playing golf? Huh? Now, Arthur Hamilton. Looks as if our host is in orbit. Hey, wait a minute, you guys. Hey, Kirby's gonna drop it.
I don't know why that shot need to be there. Oh,
Listen, hey, I got a nephew. I got a nephew right in Harvard, right now. You don't have a nephew. What? I don't have a nephew. Okay, correct. I don't have a nephew. He's there, all right. He's there, all right. My daughter. She's married.
I've been a bad boy.
I'm a grandfather. Believe me, they'll never drag it out of me. I'll stand right here on my constitutional rights. I'm not a grandfather. Why you all staring at me like that? Hey, John.
Why is this part of a paranoia trilogy? I wonder.
Yeah.
Like, this shot specifically.
Hey, John, why are they staring at me like that? They know. They know what? They're like you.
reborn.
Breathing accelerates.
Shut up! Shut up, damn you! Just who the hell do you think you are?
This amount of subjective camera was especially very different for a lot of Hollywood movies this time, where you'd be, presumably the eyes of the character.
The soundtrack.
Obviously very European at this time.
Yeah.
But later on, Jonathan Demme did a lot of that and was usually associated with that. Later on with Something Wild, and especially with Silence of the Lambs.
You don't know what they're doing to me.
Come on now, buddy. Calm down. Calm down.
I've got to see you.
That's impossible right now.
Why?
It just is. You've got to get hold of yourself fast. You'll be sorry.
What they did?
I can't explain, but you'll be
There's this reborn Nora.
She's not one of them. She works for the company.
What?
Twist. What a twist.
Right. Oh, no. She was so... Why, Charlie? Why?
Your adjustment was bound to be difficult in the first stages. Don't you see the company simply provided
An employee.
Another movie that this all of a sudden put me in the mind of, in terms of everyone being in on this truth that the character himself might not totally be, is The Swimmer.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which we saw relatively recently for the first time and quite like.
Yeah.
Another icon of the era, Burt Lancaster again.
Yeah.
That's, I think, one of the great paranoid fears of anybody is that everyone is around them is in on some secret or something they don't know. That's just a kind of a classic paranoid fear.
Of course, he's returning to his own home.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want him to go, but he did.
Yeah, he definitely went off-road already.
Yeah, this is an off-road, yeah.
And in some ways, also, I'm going to get away.
Yeah.
But, again, typically with I'm going to get aways, they are not successful.
Well, ultimately, it won't be, but he's free.
Yeah.
Free for a moment.
To quote the master, of course.
I bet he's thinking, still looks like crap.
That's another bubble that's going to pop for him in this scene is the whole life moved on without me, I guess. Yeah. That she, got over it and moved on. Which he certainly didn't think was going to be a problem for himself to move on, but as it turns out, of course, it is.
Yep.
It me.
When you see yourself. When you retweet yourself.
Yeah. When it's the 5-year anniversary of a Facebook post.
Seconds moment of all times. Like holding a picture of yourself, but you're not yourself.
And a reflection of yourself.
Yeah, but that isn't you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But now is you. Maybe?
One time.
So glad you were able to come.
Thank you. I didn't mean to barge in.
Oh, not at all. Very kind of you. I must have sounded strange over the phone, but you see, Arthur never mentioned...
Well, I just met your late husband last year, shortly before.
Yes. Please, sit down.
I wonder what the story was of why he was in a hotel room to begin with.
Must been on a business trip, maybe, or something.
Or if or if they were like, oh, he was with a prostitute or something. Like, I just wonder what the setup of that was. Like, you know, yeah, it probably would have just been like, oh, he went on a business trip. I don't know.
I admire your husband's watercolors.
Really?
Not that he was professional, but he did have something. He mentioned some paintings in the cupboard up in the garage. It's the reason that I was wondering if I might pick one up as a memento.
I'm sorry, but the garage has been cleaned out.
You threw them away.
No, not exactly.
You have a lovely place here.
Oh, thank you.
This was the study, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. How did you know?
Your husband talked a lot about this house, about his family. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to stir up painful memories.
No, it's not that. It's just that I never knew Arthur to do that very much.
What do you mean?
I don't want to bore you.
No, please. I'd like to know. You see,
I gots to know.
I'd really like to know. It's not just curiosity. We shared an interest in art. The last time I saw him, I did some sketches. Now I'd like to do a painting. Well, I have lines, face.
Posthumous portraiture.
I'm not joking, Mrs. Hampton.
Well, of course you're not. I'm sorry. You've sent me quite a task. He was a quiet man. I think the thing I most remember him for were his silences.
This is probably the saddest thing that you could ever say about anybody. Like,
Some voice. Never talked about it, so I never knew what it was. Oh, he was a good man. He lived as if he were a stranger here. I mean, he never let anything touch him. Became absorbed in things, his job mostly. He worked hard. He became more detached. There was a look around his eyes as if he were trying to say something. I don't know what. Protest against what he'd surrendered his life to. I never knew what he wanted. And I don't think he ever knew. Fought so hard for what he'd been taught to want. And when he got it, he just grew more and more confused. The silences grew longer. We never talked about it. We lived our lives in a polite, celibate truce. See, Arthur had been dead a long, long time before.
Yeah, to describe a marriage as a truce is such a sad thing.
and that she literally just said he'd been dead a long, long time before then. Like, wow.
I can't tell you much more, enough?
Should we go?
Hope I've been some help.
Yes, you have.
So, nope, ain't happening there. Wonder if he can, like, the character considered actually revealing himself, or if he's just, you know.
Yeah. Won't be a painting, I'm afraid, but all I have.
I'm sorry, Mr. Wilson. It doesn't matter. I want to go back.
Of course, sir.
No, I don't mean California. To the company. Start again, all over. Antiochus Wilson die, can't he, John? The company. Is it possible?
I think so, sir.
Begin again. Quite honestly, I'm not the least bit sorry, because there were certain mistakes made in my case.
Of course, but before we go into all that, let me ask you whether you can recommend and sponsor a new client. With someone in your acquaintance outside whom you feel would benefit by the company's services.
Benefit in quotes.
Sponsor yourself, you know.
Oh, yes, of course.
A business associate, perhaps, someone down the street. Well, you don't have to be intimately acquainted with a man to realize he'd be receptive to the sort of opportunity we offer.
I'm sorry, right now I just can't seem to... Well, what I mean is I'd like to think about it.
Well, that's all we ask. As you can imagine, our business is acquired through present clients. It's a word-of-mouth operation, Wilson. You don't suppose we can advertise in magazines and newspapers?
No, of course not.
I think you'll come up with something.
Hold it. Thank you. Hold your arm up, please, Mr. Wilson.
Excuse me, I don't understand. Is all this
13 and a half. Profile. Turn sideways, Mr. Wilson.
Wait just a moment. Is this necessary for...
Hold it. Hold it. That's it. Back here.
What is this, preliminary for surgery?
Certainly, Mr. Wilson. Years going by, a lot happens to the human body in a year.
Yeah,
That's another shocking thing is it's been a year.
Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, oh yeah, baby, oh yeah. No worries here. We're not gonna do anything wrong. Satisfaction guaranteed. Like, if you're not satisfied, won't be getting your money back. So,
oops, too bad. There's just the vibe checking stations, I think.
Yeah. Just reminds me of Beetlejuice. Like, everybody's sitting around waiting to be seen by their caseworker. Number 54,601,000, Verndock.
Verndock.
That's the guy that choked on a chicken.
Yeah.
Eating a chicken.
That's not a euphemism, by the way.
No, he literally choked on a chicken and died, so...
Well, it could have been like a 2-for-1 action. I don't know.
We're gonna table that right now.
We'll maybe return to that question when it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we do Beetlejuice, which we already have plans to do. So. Verndock?
Yeah. Fidelio?
same time. How long have you been here? A while. When you phoned me, you were here. Even the first time. You sounded. The whole thing was something tremendous. This rebirth, everything, even when you hadn't made a go of it. Thought you'd have a better chance. Oh, good God, how long does a man have to wait to get into surgery? Not long, usually. I had to stay around and telephone you necessary through your first adjustment. But now, that's what you meant about our being tied together. I couldn't help it, Charlie. I had to find out where I went wrong. The years I've spent trying to get all the things I was told were important, that I was supposed to want. Things that people or meaning, just things. California.
Obsession with things, as Jimmy Carter wants to talk about.
Obsession with things. Get these filthy things out of your life.
Jimmy Carter ever screened this at the White House, I wonder. When he was elected later on. 10 years later. Jimmy Carter's still alive as we speak. How old is he exactly?
I don't know.
In his 90s, I know.
Yeah.
90, he'll be 97 in October.
Wow.
That has to be the oldest president who's ever lived.
Yeah.
I imagine George H.W. He was.
And that'll probably be something that they get older and older.
Yeah.
But yep, he's finally getting to go.
Yeah, because H.W. was 94 when he had passed away.
Mr. Carlson, please.
This has a real, like, prestige where it's like, drowning. It's like going home. It says, and then towards the end of the movie, it's like,
it's agony.
It's agony.
Because he's someone who once almost drowned before. When I first saw that movie, I was like, "What?" And then they're like, "No, yeah," and I was like, "Yeah, like, see, like, I was like, no fun."
You don't seem to understand.
I don't recommend it.
Mr. Wilson.
Don't recommend almost drowning.
Yeah, I mean,
I've told you over and over again, I cannot think of anyone. I can't believe that. Ruby, I've been shuffled around long enough. I think it's about time I had the opportunity to start living some kind of meaningful existence. If I did sponsor someone, wouldn't that delay my trip to surgery in the event that I were needed from time to time to, say, advise him? No, that's not likely. Not if the selection is a good one. Sorry. I don't seem to be able to think of a single soul. You mean you deliberately won't have it your way?
we'll see how that turns out.
That'll be all. Mr. Wilson, you have to go back to the Daily. Processing, please. This is Ruby. On Wilson 722. I think we could go to the next stage now.
The next stage.
So I wonder if what happens to him is truly what happened to Murray Hamilton.
I wonder about that
if
too.
It actually was
because
he got to get a new.
I've wondered if I think that's one of the unanswered questions of the movie is whether or not they actually do give you another second chance if you help them out, or if they just do what they're going to do to him here to everybody. I don't know. Part of me would like to think that they did give do what they said they were going to do for him. But I don't think I would trust them. So
Well, they seem particularly frustrated about the demands he was just making. So it makes me wonder if it is something different. But I don't know. Doesn't really matter in the end, because right here's our main character. So. Antiochus Wilson.
Johnny
Wilson.
Antiochus. I'm sorry, Wilson.
When were you a young man?
Yeah. That's what I'm wondering. Like, how
18th
long?
century?
Yeah, like how long has this been going on? Is what I want to know.
Right before the British fired their first shots.
We used paper bags then, like for new faces, like
Too. Except we do have a high percentage of failures. I guess that's to be expected.
Oh, it's like, well,
Yeah.
Must be all their fault. Like.
We're always working to find ways to improve the system. Now we make mistakes. Fact is, when our clients first started coming back here, I just wanted to chuck the whole thing, but I couldn't.
I know neither of us have seen the Manchurian Candidate remake.
No.
Jonathan Demme directed,
No, I haven't.
We're fans of Demme. I'd be curious to know what a modern remake of this would look like. I mean, I feel like so many things have aped this and other types of things like this that it's kind of sort of been remade a bunch of times in different ways, but it would be interesting if somebody would approach that again. But I think approaching it from a woman's point of view would be interesting, especially, there's a lot more agency with female filmmakers now, but and actresses.
And can't let the mistakes jeopardize the dream.
Yeah. Time to go have the procedure. Like.
Time keeps on slipping.
Yeah.
Surgery, sir. But I've got a very tight schedule. Please.
Get on the gurney, please.
Efficiency. You're lucky we got a max.
Oh,
we're going to. Can you help us obliterate your entire existence, please?
Nothing of you will exist. Like.
That's just so you won't fall off.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Talk about my identity.
We will be here, Smuck.
Fine. That's fine.
Think about it. Doing it on my own. You see, it's so important. Choice. You gotta change. We have to talk about it.
We will. I'll look into it personally. Just remember, son, we gotta keep plugging away at the dream. The mistakes teach us how it wasn't wasted. Remember that.
My name is Dr. Morris, sir. According to our records, you were reared in the Protestant faith. Did you convert to any other during your adjustment? No. Good. That is good in the sense that we have a certain definition. Now, I am not suggesting that being a Protestant is any better than being a Catholic or Jew. As a matter of fact, I am qualified to care for you in either of those faiths as well. I was ordained in each. Rabbi, priest, and minister. I admit it unusual, maybe even a bit advanced.
Wait a minute. What's happening?
Well, my good sir, when we have finished, you will go on to the next stage.
I don't mean that.
Ultimately, Mr. Wilson, we'll...
So, wait, we're talking about a stage other than we're
Yes,
talking about another stage of existence at this point. Like,
That's no answer. I want to know what's happening to me now.
Shut up, please.
Like the ultimate second stage. The final stage.
And blessed shalt thou be in going out. And he said, thou canst not see my face. No man can see me and live. Requiem et lucet optimia perpetuam. Meque communis gratia tua corona eterna per hominum. I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were
This is just unbelievable that somebody could act like this.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm sure this was also very strange and traumatic for a lot of people to see Rock Hudson in a scene like this.
Yeah.
Fear not thou them which kill the body. Ut in resurrectionis gloria inter-
I love that shot. It's just he's not moving. He's like, oh yeah, whatever. Like, he gave up, I guess, at that point.
Libra animus omnium fidelium Deum. God be with you, sir.
That's the end of that, I guess.
What's his data? Wilson, mesomorph, age 51, no current diseases. Requisition from day room stock May 6th. Released for cadaver use last night. CPS number 722. Disposition, death by automobile accident caused by cerebral hemorrhage. Acid H.
So obviously the twist of the movie is that these people that don't play along are the cadavers that they have to find for the new people. So, yeah. So like I said, I do wonder if Murray Hamilton even got to go on to another stage or not. Like, or if he got the final stage, you know.
You are my best work, Mr. Wilson. I'm sorry it all has to end like this.
So he's disappointed that, you know.
Why couldn't you help me out with my work? Like,
you used to be beautiful.
I think we'll put the hemorrhage right in the left exoccipital and the lingual gyrus. Put that light over here.
so is this a real, like, Syriana, like, I want you to drug him, put him in the front of a car, run him into a truck at 50 miles an hour? Like, you know, it's like, is that how this ended up? Like,
Relax, old friend.
hello, darkness, my old friend. Cranial drill.
What's that about?
I wonder what that one does.
What does the cranial drill do exactly?
I've always remembered this final image of the movie to be one of the most sullen.
Reminds me of a lot of dental visits I've had where I'm staring up at the light and while drills are going in. Whirring fade, it says. Well,
there's a funny movie right there. Like, but that final image has always struck with me. It's one of the first things I think about whenever I think about this movie.
Yeah.
Texan. That guy who was like, "You old devil," was a Texan, I guess. Like, you old rascal.
Plump blonde. Mayberry. Doctor in operating room. Oh, he was the final guy who appeared, I guess.
Yeah.
Credit anyways. William Richard Wintersole. So yeah, not a upbeat ending.
This being your second time, any new thoughts? I mean,
I think, you know, it's kind of fitting that earlier the wife had described him as memorable for his silences, is what he's more remembered for. And I think the sound design of this movie is really, in particular, fantastic. And, of course, Jerry Goldsmith's score is really good, but it's also sparse. It's not there all the time. And so there's a lot of silences in the movie. And even knowing where it goes, you know, that just adds this inherent dramatic tension into every scene of, like, that this is, you know, it's going to be reserved. It's not going to manipulate you into thinking this is exactly what the scene is about and what's going on in it. That the silences really play out in a very terrific way. That seems, of course, very, very conventional. Representative of John Frankenheimer's style, you know, and what he's trying to, you know, convey. I was actually just curious now, off the top of my head, what his next movie after this was. Well, we said Grand Prix was the same year.
Yeah.
I actually said that this. You might have said this earlier. I can't remember. That was nominated for the Palme d'Or.
Yeah, and it was booed.
Cannes.
Yeah. And it was disliked.
His next movie in '68 was The Fixer.
Yeah, I was looking into that the other night, and I was like, "Oh, I really want to see that, whatever that is, like about Russia or something."
Based on all Fixer, inspired by the 1913 trial of Menahem Mendel Belis. I'm not sure, a Russian Jew who was falsely accused of. So yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think I slightly still prefer 7 Days in May to this in terms, but I think this is the better film. And,
I think this is his best,
maybe his best film overall.
I think
as well.
Personally, it's his best and my favorite of his films. Although I love a lot of his movies, and I think a lot of his movies, especially those three of The Manchurian Candidate and 7 Days in May, are shocking in their own ways. But this is just on another level of which shouldn't make it the best or my favorite necessarily, but it's just the amalgamation of elements. I think. That, I don't know.
I think it's comfortable to say that it might be a while, but this probably will not be the last Frankenheimer movie that we do.
No,
I can see a few more that we actually return to.
And there's a lot more I want to see that I haven't seen, and I feel like I've seen a good little amount. He's one of those people. Lumet, we didn't talk about as much as I would have liked to in this podcast, but made a lot of movies, during the same time, and
he's another one that kind of preceded New Hollywood era, but then also made some films of the New Hollywood era.
And his films were more New Hollywood in the era of New Hollywood, I think, than Frankenheimer's most likely were, because he kind of, he made that like French Connection 2, and like he kind of
Frankenheimer did,
right? Yeah. He kind of did a lot of random stuff in the 70s. The
thing with Lumet was, I know he also, I think he did some TV in the early to mid 50s, but he also came from this whole theatrical background, the theater background, and his movies are much more actor centric.
Yeah.
And it's all a lot about the performances in them and giving the actors the space to do that. There are some great performances in Frankenheimer films, no question, but he's much more interested in the image and the camera in a way that Lumet isn't quite exactly. But that's what makes both of them great in their own ways. But yeah, Lumet's another figure of this time period that's making a lot of big swings and a lot of interesting stuff as well as some of these.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get to at least a few of his movies at some point. I'm not really sure what they would be off the top of my head because he's made a lot of good ones, but and I'd say overall Lumet's the better filmmaker actually, because he's made a handful of 5-star movies, and I don't think that Frankenheimer, I've yet to see any of his films that are that level personally. But this is pretty close, I think.
Yeah. But again, the thing I think about a lot with Lumet is I think of Henry Fonda in 12 Angry Men. I think of Al Pacino in Dog Day Afternoon. I think of the
Paul Newman in The Verdict.
Paul Newman, what I mean? So like his movies have a very actor focused style to them, which is great. And Frankenheimer's great in his own way. But that's Seconds. Again, I think one last little thing I'll say about Seconds before we kind of end this. I think one really great thing in general about the Criterion Collection is that in general they go after huge, big art film classics, but at the same time they go after some kind of arty genre fare as well that kind of gets lost through the cracks. I think a movie like this is kind of in a good way, the stereotypical Criterion movie that's like it really was pretty great and accomplished, but it was kind of forgotten about at the time, but now it's
because it kind of had that for a long time. It kind of had that stigma. I'm sure Alec Baldwin would have agreed, that stigma as a movie that was kind of it wasn't a lost film necessarily, but it's like it kind of got forgotten. Carnival of Souls was a similar situation, but even that was independent and it was not made.
No, this is
on a level, but this is a Paramount film. So there's certain movies, so there's certain movies that happens with, but this one, that it makes sense, like something like Carnival of Souls that saw second life mostly in the 80s. Yeah. But this really has seen its second life since the Criterion release. And most of the articles we were finding were people in 2014 or around that time. I think that's when that came out.
13 or 14.
Who were talking about, remember Seconds? Or, if you've never heard of that, here's this. And it seemed like there were a lot of people that came out of the woodwork that were like, this movie,
And it being attached to Frankenheimer's filmography means it's always going to be have an audience and be found in some way.
And I think that it definitely, like I said, definitely has an audience now. Thankfully,
it's just of those three paranoia movies, it's in some ways the on the surface least remarked upon.
Right.
But I think again has this power that it's not as focused on these larger institutional ideas. It's more a little more personal, a little smaller.
Right. Which, like I said, I think it has a plethora of political statements it's making, but it's not an expressly political film, but it's more of a countercultural statement than anything, which is interesting that it was made at the time that was going on and not even 10 years later that it already had recognized
this obviously isn't the way I first saw it, but this almost seemed like the perfect movie that you'd be like channel surfing if you're up at 1 a.m. And you catch the very towards the beginning of it, and you're like, what is this?
It would be like
and
a good TCM Underground movie or something,
And especially if it's late and you're awake, but you're in a little bit of a different state of mind, and you see this, that would imagine be almost the perfect way to see it. Is like in this kind of frenzied
like
state.
in the silences in the movie, I think could kind of lull you into being real sleepy, and then the ending would grab you and shake you through the screen. It really is a genius.
Like I said, I think
conception of the movie, but.
And that way, I think of Eraser. I didn't see Eraserhead that way, but I think that would make for interesting experience to watch it that way. So again, John Frankenheimer second. So we both love it, and we hope you enjoyed our talking about it today. And if nothing else, hopefully you seeking it out and seeing it for the first time. So our very next film, and this will be episode 9 we got coming up. And I know that we've had a long list of a lot of movies that we're going to be getting to. We kind of have been grouping them in terms of the next 10 that we're going to do. We already have like our 11 through 20 already mapped out. And I know that just implicitly, every time I kind of look at the list, I'm like, oh yeah, this movie I really like, or I love it. But every time I am reminded that the next movie's coming up, I kind of implicitly have a smile on my face, because I think so far, for me personally anyways, this is probably my favorite movie we've touched yet, from 2004, and from director Wes Anderson. The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, which we're both pretty big fans of Wes Anderson. We've maybe been, just as fans, slightly disappointed with maybe some of his more recent films. But I know for both of us, this was one of the first movies of his we saw, and it had a big impact on him. Levi, going into next week, what's some things you maybe want to preview, or what about Life Aquatic as a movie that appealed to us to maybe do a
I think one part of it is that it seems like, and maybe this has changed a little bit over the last few years, because I haven't been paying attention to the Wes Anderson discourse the last few years, mainly since Isle of Dogs, which I did not like at all. But
I didn't really like it.
Which is the only film of his I outright dislike and do not like. Everything else I think is at least really good. I'm not as crazy about the Grand Budapest Hotel either, but that is still pretty good. But I feel like The Life Aquatic is one of his more maligned or kind of shrug-worthy films for a lot of people. And I think it's safe to... Well, actually, for him, and I think this is true for you too, it's kind of hard for us to pick of what our favorite of his films are sometimes, because I sometimes want to pick Fantastic Mr. Fox, because I'll say personally that was the first of his films I saw. We went and saw that in a theater the weekend of Thanksgiving of 2009, I remember, and that movie was a life-changing experience for me. And to see that in a theater was... magical. And that, but the next, so it's hard for me. It's always between that and Life Aquatic. But I think what is so great about The Life Aquatic is just the setting. I just eat it up. I just love it. The ocean setting and that kind of Jacques Cousteau idea, which is something I've never actively gotten into, but something I've always been very interested in. And I feel like it kind of checks a lot of boxes for me personally. And it's the only his films to actually just straight up have Bill Murray as the main character.
I was getting ready to say that in the evolution of his films, Bill Murray, Bottle Rocket came out, he wasn't at all in that. And very famously, Bill Murray still tells the story that he sent me a VHS or a copy of Bottle Rocket, and I didn't watch it. I instead read the script for Rushmore and decided to do it.
Yeah.
And he still says, I think I've still yet to see Bottle Rocket. And I kind of don't.
And let me say, like Bill Murray, I've still yet to see all of Bottle Rocket. So yeah.
And so he had a pretty big role in Rushmore. A little bit more of a step back in Royal Tenenbaums, but then a massive role, of course. Yeah. I mean, the lead performance in Life Aquatic, and as you said. The rehabilitation, in many ways, of Bill Murray at that particular point in his career is a load in large part, both in some ways to Sofia Coppola for
Lost in
Translation, some other movies he's made with her since then. I think she actually directed that very Murray Christmas or Bill Murray Christmas.
Yeah, that's
or whatever.
right. Yeah,
and Wes Anderson.
Right.
And so, I know for me personally, my top three that usually circulate among different order, but for now I think it's pretty safe to say Royal Tenenbaums is my favorite, and then Rushmore and Life Aquatic are very closely 2 and 3 in whatever order. But also at that particular moment, I mean, Rushmore was Bottle Rocket was like a indie darling hit, like as this new guy. Rushmore was a pretty big critical hit. Royal Tenenbaums by that point was the most acclaimed he got, and so I think the expectations were getting very very high for him, and a lot of the critics really were baffled by Life Aquatic and started to say, "Oh, he's almost parodying himself at that point," which I think we know is not true because some of his later films have actually approached that.
Yeah, because and we can talk about this more next time when we talk about him in depth and our thoughts on him, which are all mostly positive, by the way. I mean, because we love his movies but like any cinephile, I guess. But his newest films, I think, I have this idea of. They have become, like I say, this director has become themselves, which I think is a negative sense, is saying Wes Anderson has finally become Wes Anderson.
He's reached the end of his
and like with Isle of Dogs, even somewhat with Grand Budapest Hotel, but that movie is even so ambitious in what it's doing with different storylines and different time periods
and history,
history. Right. But the Isle of Dogs is just like, no, you've just become Wes Anderson, and you have nothing more to contribute.
And I'm actually,
but we haven't yet seen the French Dispatch,
and I'm actually really looking forward to that. But Life Aquatic has from the very beginning been one of my favorite films from him, and and I think it has mostly the best of him.
Yeah,
touches on the Wes Anderson that people are not such a big fan of, but overall, I think his movie that actually has the most heart.
What's that?
In it.
I mean, and I kind of love the moment, but in the moment in the movie where he's like, in 12 years he'll be 11 and a half, and he says, that's my favorite age.
Yeah,
and it's like, we're
going to talk about that moment when we get to
both
the movie.
Both a distillation of his best and his worst, I think. So,
but again, I think it's the movie of his that, for me, has the most heart.
Yeah, I agree. And his movies are always about sons and fathers. I would say. And, and his movies are usually about sons and fathers, but I feel like this is the most directly in that realm.
And I think also, we haven't really mentioned him. Owen Wilson's obviously tied up with his career. I think one of the best Owen Wilson performances also is
Life
in that
Aquatic,
movie. So again, Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. That's what we're hitting next week. We're going to conclude today's episode with this really interesting, fun little featurette we found was shot at the time of the production of Seconds. And what's very baffling or jarring about it is it's all in color.
Yeah, well,
which we just spent so much time seeing this whole world in black and white.
I think it was mostly the scenes that were filmed in New York when he returns home.
Yeah.
And all that, and I was just like, this is so weird to see this in color.
Yeah.
This whole thing actually reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen this or not, Kyle, but for Clute, they did like a making of that was kind of similar to this, sort of, and it was like, Pakula and Fonda and Sutherland kind of walking around, and like Sutherland voiceover, like dressed up in a cowboy hat. It's like real, and he's like, I got the script for Clute and blah blah blah. It kind of reminds me of this, but this was a little bit shorter. But anyway, this is very interesting because, like I said, it's in color, so it's weird. You won't be able to see that, but go look it up.
You'll at least hear it here. So this is signing off for today. This is Kyle.
This is Levi,
and we hope you take care of yourself.
God bless Seconds.
Yeah, God bless Seconds, and God bless you. Take care.
I've worked in New York only twice, both times this year. Last spring I was here on a picture called Blindfold. Well, the film I'm working on now is called Seconds. It's certainly a different type of picture and certainly a different role for me. It's almost a horror movie. certainly a suspenseful movie, and certainly very dramatic.
Most of Seconds, a Paramount picture, was shot on location in Southern California. Several important scenes were photographed in New York City and Scarsdale, including the one Rock Hudson will appear in on this hot August day.
With me and with the company shooting this location, of course, the director, John Frankenheimer.
All right, here we go, number one again.
Eddie Lewis, the producer, and James Wong Howe, the cameraman. This is the first time I've worked with John Frankenheimer. I've looked forward for quite a while now to making a picture with him. He's quite a marvelous director, I think. We arrive at the scene together, which makes me, the actor, feel not only like I'm performing, but that I'm contributing, which is a marvelous feeling to have.
Seconds is the story of a middle-aged man who leaves his wife and family, completely changes his physical appearance, and begins life anew. A young man, but a man without a past. A man living in limbo.
The man that I'm playing cannot adjust to his new surroundings, so he feels he must backtrack. He goes back to see his wife to find out some clue into what made him tick, because he really doesn't know himself. In the scene in the car, I say that I want to go back. I don't want to be a young man. I want to be my own age. So I want to go back to the hospital or the company and get myself reborn again.
To the onlooker, photographing a film sequence seems dull and repetitious. The brief action of walking from the house to the street was repeated time after time so it could be covered from a variety of angles. For the short scene inside the car, the automobile had to be rigged with camera mounts, first in front and then on each side, and the film action repeated for each camera setup. A single day's work, which resulted in a few brief moments in the completed picture, was all that was required of Rock Hudson in the New York locations. Was it worth bringing the high-priced star 3,000 miles for this short sequence?
The company has been here shooting for a week. The scenes that they shot did not involve me, so it's much more inexpensive to bring me to New York, shoot the scene here, and send me back than it is to take the whole company to the streets, any streets, say, around Los Angeles with the whole company, and then go back to the studio, and then pack up and fly to New York. Furthermore, to duplicate the Scarsdale area, I don't think one could in Los Angeles.
John Frankenheimer is one of the new Hollywood film directors who goes out of his way to escape the confining walls of the sound stage. Most of Seconds, as most of Frankenheimer's other films, was shot on location. What's all this traveling like for the star, raised in the relative comfort of the studio?
Well, of course, the disadvantage of going on a location, especially here in a big city in New York, is that, first of all, you're not home. You live in a hotel. You're in a big city. There's a bustling, great big city, which is certainly different than Los Angeles. And from the hotel, one goes to various locations in and around the city of New York. The advantages are that you're away from home, that you live in a hotel, and you're in a big city, and you're in a bustling big city, and there's a lot to do and see.